Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, bringing you the week 2 preview, coming off what was perhaps the most electric opening week of OUA football that I certainly can recall in my time covering the league or playing. We're going to set up what week 2 has in store for you. Tom's going to talk about his time in Ottawa, setting up for our adventures to cover the Panda game, and so much more. But not before I ask first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I am doing so well, my man. After such an incredible week 1, building towards some more exciting things that we're doing for all of our fans here and covering this great game, and just looking forward to the remainder of this season. How could you not be on cloud nine if you were the two of us right now?
It's a beautiful time to be an OUA and a U Sports fan. And of course, this weekend, Can West football is kicking off again as well. So just more U Sports action being brought your way. As we mentioned, we'll do our midseason check-in around those conferences, aside from just, major news and notes breaking out from those other conferences. But just a great time to be a U Sports football fan. But as we were alluding to, Tom, we've said this before this year. Though we've caught flack before that we haven't been to a Panda, we're not only making our first appearance at the Panda, we are doing a game day live. Your work was bringing you out into the Ottawa area, and you were able to link up with their sports information folks in terms of getting to see a bit of TD Place, the sort of Lansdowne Park area, everything like that, to kind of confirm up with our plans there. So take it away, my friend. Like, shout out to those folks there that rolled out the red carpet for you. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was incredible to be able to see TD Place. First off, it is a beautiful stadium. And then to get a chance to walk around and to really get a sense of where there's going to be people and everything else. It was hilarious as I was speaking to their sports information person. Her name is Paige. She's fantastic, by the way. She was mentioning to me that the stands or the seats themselves seat about 24,000. Yeah, it's already sold out as it stands right now. And now they're looking into
Dick.
where can we do standing room only, where can we put people and whatever else. So it's gonna be a rockin' affair, and your boys are gonna be there live in person. We've got a setup. We're gonna be damn near on the field for that game day live, talking about all the games that have already happened in that scenario and previewing the Panda game. So I am so excited for this. Not only are we going to our first Panda, but we're doing it in style.
100%. So can't wait for that one. And again, if you're going to be at that game, if you're planning to be there, hit us up. Let us know. I think we will be field level, which again is such an immense privilege. But obviously, that's a full day affair. And we always, as always, when we go to these games, it's so great to see you all there. And Tom and I, we obviously brought Dakota on to share his opinions about week 1 with OUA TV, and you all have been so great in sharing as well your opinions. And, as we talked about, and as people have mentioned in the comments, both on YouTube and Reddit, in our DMs, on Instagram, people sharing their thoughts, at the end of the day, if you truly love this game like us, the best way to experience it is just get out to these games. And Tom, you and I, of the 5 games going on this week, are going to be in the house for 4 of them. We would go on 5 for 5 if that one game was somewhere closer than the nation's capital. But again, we're saving our Ottawa trip for the Panda. But let's spare no more time than hopping into the week 2 preview. And the week is kicking off with a game we will be in the house for, live from Ron Joyce Stadium. Goodness gracious me, oh my. Tom's McMaster Marauders are playing host to the Queen's Golden Gales. Mac coming off of a heartbreaking loss, though a very promising loss at York week 1, being on the doorstep to possibly tie it up. By the way, those stats are now available, though I don't know if I trust them. If you want to dive into them, we no doubt will talk about some of those performances. And Queens likewise coming off a heartbreaking loss at home in the 4 OT game against the Western Mustangs. Tom, this is an interesting game where both these teams come out of games where in both situations, though Queens is maybe a tier or 2 above, I guess by our ranking, 2 tiers above where Mac's at, based on their opponents and just all the things around that week 1 matchup, they were perhaps, even Queens being at home, the underdog to the team they were facing. and both losing, but coming out being like, man, you have to hold your head high. Mac, perhaps even more so, just based on losing Keegan, losing guys like Nick Adair, and just being, some new faces and some new places. Queens, obviously, exciting to see with Vreekin back, that defense being as strong as they have been. Whenever Western's coming to town, you're going into their house, it's always going to be a tough affair. How do you think about both these teams coming out of games in which they pick up a loss, but they both feel really good about it? But knowing that in this game, like we talked about this in the preseason, we've talked about already, I'm sure it's going to be thematic throughout the year. It's such a competitive OUA that it's one thing to lose week one and say, hey, you know what? We gave it a great shot. We looked good in these situations. We controlled what we can control. Sometimes the other team just makes a few more plays. You can't make that same, it's harder to make that same argument consecutive weeks, because at a certain point, those losses just rack up. Both these teams have to be happy coming off of week one losses, but obviously going into this one, these two teams each need a win.
Yeah, big time. And I think going into what your question was there, kind of the comment, certainly you have to look at it from a McMaster standpoint of, as good as everybody thought that York is and is going to be this year, Mac was right there with him the entire way. And if not for a stop on a 3rd and 1 or 2 at the very end of the game, that game might have gone into overtime, and then who knows what would happen from there. So I think that from a McMaster standpoint, at least from the outside looking in, certainly everybody's expectations of them and what this team can do should certainly be raised if you've been following along here. Queens, well, yes, you know that you can compete with the Westerns and they're always at the top and everything else. Queens has known that for the entire Steve Snyder the coaching era, excuse me. I gotta work out my words. If only I was in a profession where you need to speak right.
You're golden, brother.
But with these Queens Gales, they've known that they're the top tier of the OUA. They know that they are right there with them. So it's less yay, this is great, we can compete with everybody, and more so we have to make that final jump. We've been to the Yates Cup a couple of times. Obviously, earlier on, been at that doorstep of getting into those big games, but just coming a little bit close. Have to look into what is that extra step in order to get you over that hump, to get you truly into that proven tier, like we were talking about, because you have won this. I think both teams, you can look at that. Sure, these teams should be a lot better, but you and I were talking to Coach Adam Grandy after the York game, being like, man, your defense looks great, and you guys are doing this and that and everything else. He goes, yeah, I appreciate that, guys, but we still lost the game. So consolation prizes don't mean much in this sport.
Absolutely. And the defense did look really good. Queens' defense looked really good. Obviously, when it ends up being 45 points scored, that raises a bit of a question mark. The late game meltdown, if you will, obviously played a big role in that. But like so often is the case, the battle at quarterback is really the essential thing here. And I didn't think I was going to be as excited for this quarterback matchup as I was, going into the preseason, as I am going into week 2, especially now that we can see what Luke Thalman did, or supposedly did, because again, though the stats are up now, I don't know if I fully trust them. But Tom, your boy went 18 for 24, 272, and 3 touchdowns against a York defense that was banged up, missing a couple key guys that when we talk about York, we'll get into in a bit more detail, in Peyton Ryder and Raekwon Lewis Gibbs, who hopefully are back for them. But a York defense that, though banged up, the mad scientist there and Coach Knox dialing it up. And that was a really strong performance by him on that day. Obviously, we were really happy with what Vreekin did. We loved seeing what he did at East West, and you got to speak to him there, and a bit more of an expectation for him. But as a quarterback battle, and let's start with your guy in LT, how do you feel based on the way that he was able to execute against that York defense that I think will be better as the year progresses, the weeks go along, they get healthier. We don't know about Brody Clark. Again, we'll save more of that conversation for the York-Ottawa game. But based on how he performed against York in what I felt like was very much don't lose us this game, take a couple opportunities, but just make smart plays consistently. And then you compare that with Alex Vreekin in his return to action against a good Western defense, ending up 18 for 39, 284, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. And thinking about that Adam Grandy defense, when you compare these quarterbacks, who they had to face in week one and going into this game. What are you excited to see from these two guys? What do you feel like was real based on that first week? Because small sample size. And what do you think might have been a bit of just maybe not sustainable or maybe an improvement from one of these guys?
So I loved what I saw from Luke Thalman, like you were mentioning here. I thought he made a lot of really smart decisions with the football and just took what that defense was giving them. The other side of this as well, and while I will continue to get into what I really liked about Luke, the other piece I want to shout out is that McMaster offensive line. No sacks in a game against a Greg Knox defense where we saw blitzes, half blitzes, and you see pressure coming from different areas all the time, including some of those outstanding large defensive ends that we were commenting on. Like, these guys look like men amongst boys, and still no sacks on the day. I credit that to the outstanding work of that offensive line. I think they are massively improved, even just from a couple of years ago to where they are now, and getting that time so that Luke can throw the ball and just make it so that he's getting the ball out quick and getting it into the hands of his receivers. I don't know if it's 100% accurate, because I remember you and I being in that game being like, oh, I wish that Jackson Taylor touched the ball a little bit more. It does show him with 4 catches for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. So if that's the case, 4 catches might be small, but everything else, Jackson Taylor, go off, my guy.
Yeah.
But I liked a lot of what I saw from Thalman. I think that the offensive play calling as well around him and Coach Chris Hopkins has gotten even better with that balanced attack, allowing him to run the ball so that York can't just pin their ears back and come after this dude, and then being smart with the football. I am really, really impressed with the McMaster offense, and I'm excited to see where they're going here. Alex Vreeken, I was so thankful to see him back in the second half of that game. I thought he went down with that injury in the first half, and that was going to be it again for this young man. But I think when he's playing at the top of his game, he can really do some great work. I mean, we saw him near the back end of that game, even when it was tight and it was close, finding his receivers down the field, taking off and running with it in overtime and putting his body on the line to make sure that he can get into the end zone. I love this guy. I think he's a great gamer, and I'm excited to see his growth here as this continues to go on. I know that Coach Grandy is going to have something dialed up for these guys too. He even mentioned to us how excited he was to play against the Queens team at the end of that York game. So I think that this is going to be an outstanding matchup, but I am looking to see how well these two quarterbacks can play, and especially, you and I were talking about this earlier, Luke Thalman, you did great work, outstanding work against York. But you're going to be going up against arguably the best defensive secondary in U Sports. Whoo, you got to have a solid game plan to go up against those dudes.
Oh, absolutely. And you just bringing up Grandy just makes me so, like, just on a personal level. Like, first of all, it's partly why we're going to get a great game, because these folks are great football minds. But Adam Grandy versus Matt Nesbitt as the defensive shot caller and the offensive shot caller is just so wild. And I'm so happy we're in the house for this one. And I have major love for both of those guys. But you brought up the line for Mac, and again, deserving of all their flowers, especially based on, well, not based on how hard we were on them, myself particularly a few years back, but they really have grown as a unit. It's really great to see, and they did do a great job. And for York, they did have some dogs on that front seven, bit of injury that they were dealing with. But thinking about the line play, because this is, I think, what is more than anything separating them. Yes, that defensive core for Queens is awesome. We can talk about Mac in the back end and what you liked out of guys like Isaiah Shields and obviously Zach Payne and dudes like that. But in terms of on the front line, this is a Mac team that's now going to all of a sudden be having to deal with guys like, Oliver Jackson, who you called out in preseason as someone to look for, and he had a heck of a game. Guys like Eric Johnston in the middle, who's really big. Stephen Capay, who picked up a sack for Queens. And obviously with Justin Pace patrolling that front seven, a much different team than what they were having to deal with. I mean, not even talking about the back end and how Thalman's going to deal with that. But I think one of the reasons Thalman was able to be comfortable and more than anything, to me, the thing that impressed me was confident as well. I loved seeing that out of LT, was the confidence. But a big part of it too was that, and where are the numbers on the day? And again, I don't know if I entirely trust them, but Mac rushed it for 107 yards on the ground against York. With this front seven, those D linemen in specific that we saw have a good day against a really strong Western O-line, that's where I think this game it most gets lopsided, is in the trenches. And then just to flip it around, especially when we found out that Mitch Price wasn't back for McMaster, and thinking about an offensive line that, as we talked about, especially when we saw that Jazz Cairo was back at left tackle, we know that Nicholas Henning at right tackle was back. As far as just tackles alone, perhaps the deadliest combo in all of youth sports. An O-line that we know has talent and is going to be coached up well. To me, the battle in the trenches is very lopsided, and that's where I'm going to be curious to see if Mac isn't able to be productive in the rushing game, which they were tremendously. Braden Kelly doing his thing effectively, and a few other guys. Again, their rushing stats I really don't trust in terms of the individuals. I don't know what's going on with those ones, but that was a big thing for them. I think it's what allowed Thalman to be comfortable in the pocket. I don't think I would be surprised if they're as productive in the rushing game against Queens as they were against York. Let's talk about the battle in the trenches. That's where I see this being the most lopsided is too unfair, but the most slanted towards Queens on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought that up, especially because, quite honestly, I like to use if I was this defensive coordinator, but if I was Coach McManus, I think he'd be a whole lot smarter in looking at this than I would be in this setting here. But even just from the outside looking in, looking at this offense and seeing, there was great work against York and everything with the bodies that you have at Queens, I'm going into this being like, I'm going to stop the run because I've got some outstanding defensive alignment and arguably the best linebacker in youth sports in Justin Pace, who can come downhill and tackle with the best of anybody. So when you're not able to run the ball and you have to throw the ball and you have to get into the teeth of Ashton Miller-Melanson, Keegan Vanek, Ian St. Arnaud, and the rest of those guys, how well are you really going to be able to react to that? Now, I think what we saw previously here, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to see from McMaster as well, is leaking out some running backs into the flats or getting them out into a little bit of space so that you're trying to pull out a linebacker rather than throwing directly against some of those outstanding DBs. But let's not forget, I really do think that Jackson Taylor is an elite level receiver. And if anybody's going to be able to get route running against these guys, I think that he could be able to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him a little bit more involved in the passing game. Maybe get your big boy Nathan Denkers in there too. Get him a little bit out of that tight end spot, get him the rock and see what he can do from that standpoint. But on the opposite side of the ball here as well, when you look at that Queens offensive line, they are built to run the football, and that's exactly what they want to do against an outstanding, or with an outstanding running back in Jarek Kassari that they've had for a few years, and Ethan Dahl even starting to get into his own rhythm here as well. For me in that McMaster defense, it's really going to come down to how well can you stop the run without dedicating 6 or 7 or 8 bodies into the box in order to do so. I love that linebacking core, like I mentioned, Aaron Lavers, Anthony Sestanovic, and Isaiah Shields. We'll see how well they are able to be kept off of from offensive linemen. I really want to see that great defensive line or those defensive linemen from McMaster step up and try to own those double teams or make some plays in the backfield, because now suddenly if you can allow Isaiah Shields to not have to come into the box, to really stay out there against some of those receivers and to commit to, we're going to take this on with just our 6 guys that are in the box and get this done, that's really where you have to be. Because if Queens is able to move the ball, not even at will, but if they're able to run the ball really effectively for 6 or 7 yards per carry, and you've got Alex Vreekin and that outstanding receiver core in the back end, it's going to be a very long day.
Most definitely. I mean, firstly, just want to go back to talking about Jackson Taylor, and I think you're absolutely right. And it's going to be so great to see what kind of a year he puts together, clearly as their go-to weapon in that regard. I don't think it's completely one-sided that their whole offense has to revolve around him, but certainly, and I think that's where their passing game starts, is with him. We talked about this player. I'm surprised he didn't make it onto the box score for the game. We talked about this player in the preseason Tier B podcast for Queens as well in that defensive secondary. Easy to forget as well about a guy like Jared Seaway, who's just another great defensive back body that can be put onto some of these guys. Now, in terms of the running attack for Queens, as you mentioned, this is partly to me like going to reflect the commentary when we start talking about the Ottawa York game, where when you look at what Queens was able to do, and I get they had the 4 extra OTs to get to a 42-point total on the day, but 29 points in regulation against a Western team that defensively we obviously expect to be very strong on this day, and doing so really without much production by Jared Kasari, who we know is one of the best of the best. And you look at that number of 9 for 22 in the game, and you say, well, that is clearly the outlier going in the opposite direction. So are you gonna bet on against what is should be a weaker defense in Mac than what he had to deal with against Western? Is it going to probably come back to where we expect him to be? I would anticipate so. And how that then opens up for some of the other guys on this team and for Vrikin, because we saw really nice days out of Mateo Tuioti at the receiving core, Russell Weir being again that kind of gadget athlete for them. Falcone was really had a really strong game for them, but save for maybe a missed call, we're not seeing Jack Ashby Jacobs break onto the scene for them as well. A guy who missed a lot of time for them last year, but just from knowing folks around the Queens program, someone who they were really excited for coming into this year and what he can do for them. In that receiving core. So just thinking about a team that when they're, and yes, Ethan Dahl had a nice day for them. I have to imagine the expectation is still that the bell cow is Kasari, and so much like we can talk about with other teams' best weapons, whether it's Jackson Taylor for Mac, that when your go-to guy is able to do the things that they should be able to do, it opens up the field for everybody else. Or if you're going to overcommit to slowing that individual down, then it's still going to open things up for everybody else. So that's the area too, and it's part and parcel with the battle in the trenches that makes that so dangerous for them on that game. One thing for Mac I'll throw in as well, though, in terms of defensively, and you talk about those linebackers, and I loved hearing you just rattle those names off, and what a day for your guy and Isaiah Shields and everything like that. But we also know that our boy in Wes McClellan was injured for most of that entire game, really didn't get to see the field. That's going to be huge if they get him back, especially in supporting on the run game. And your guy in Zach Payne, who looked really impressive, but banged up a little bit. Another guy who, a DB, but a DB who very much supports in the run. So to me, those are two names, and I don't know if you've heard anything about that or just want to comment one way or the other on if you were just to be able to say, if I was able to tell you, Tom, that, yep, you're getting Wes and you're getting Payne back for this game fully healthy, how that might anticipate it. What do you think that impact could have, especially when it comes to trying to slow down this Queens running attack that should be effective on this day?
Right before I get into that, I do want to make sure that I mention something here. I forgot to mention this off the hop here, but there was obviously a lot of controversial takes on what happened in that last Western versus Queens game and that Jack Ashby Jacobs catch or non-catch that you were talking about here. So what I did is I reached out directly to Murray Drinkwater, who is the head ref, the guy who's got the end all say all, and he has done a fantastic job in certain cases of actually admitting, no, that official didn't get that right in this scenario, or he did here. In this particular setting, he confirmed, well, even if that Jack got that 1 foot in bounds, which is all it takes in Canadian university football, he did not have control of the ball while he did that, while he was going out of bounds, that the official made the right call, despite the fact of how angry some of the Queens faithful are assuredly being at that. So I just wanted to mention that off the hop, that from the highest of highs, from the ref on high, that is the right call from that standpoint.
Still wasn't a holding penalty Windsor against Laurier in 2023. Anyways, Tom, go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Yes, but going into the run game here for McMaster, or the run defense, I should say, Wes McLennan, I think, is a great young linebacker. And right now, if he is out with that injury, that's a massive blow, not just to their defense, but especially on special teams, where he's really shining a heck of a lot for them. So I'm really hoping that he comes back. No official word on if he is or not, but Zach Payne on that weak side half, I think he's going to do a lot of good things here as well. Wouldn't be surprised to see him coming on a couple of blitzes on the backside just to try to get a little pressure in front of Vrikin, or maybe trying to trip up some of the runners, whether that's Dahl or Kasari in the backfield before they're really able to get going here. I wouldn't be surprised to see those guys get a little bit more entrenched in that, and not necessarily out of a necessity, but just more so because Coach Graney's going to be in his bag, and he's really, I think we've just seen just the surface level of what that defense can really do here. And it's only going to get better and better here. But like I said, the more that you can stop that outstanding Queens run game with the less, the better off that you will be here. If Isaiah Shields and Zach Payne both have to come into the box here to try to help out and stop Kasari and Dahl, leaving those receivers one-on-one, and it's not even a slight against McMaster's DBs. Those are just really good receivers, and that could be a big problem for you.
And I think and again, Grandy coming from a background of working with linebackers, and even when we sometimes talk about halfbacks playing in the box, ultimately they're becoming a linebacker, in a sense, in doing that. And like, there's very much a way that if Grandy wanted to come into this game and just say, like, maybe we will shut down the run. Like, because if he wants to then also say, hey, 2-4, Carter Blad, you're sniffing around the box this whole game. You add in your guy in Stestanovich, obviously, with the game that Lavers had, and you were quick to point that out when I was concerned with seeing Wes injured. And you're like, yeah, but 57 is actually a baller too. But it's still that D line that I'm worried about. Like, it's all well and good that at that sort of second tier of linebackers, couple halves sneaking into the box, if you want to do maybe like a 4-4 type of defense against Queens, even if that's going to leave you susceptible to the pass and all those types of things. I think there's a way that you can do that, but still on the front end, I'm just curious to see who really steps up on this D line for them. And especially against this Queens O-line, I don't know if this is the breakout game for any of those guys. So those linebackers are really going to be tested. But luckily, again, you couldn't have a better DC in trying to put those players in positions for success, irrespective of this matchup or any of them. Again, really, really pleased. I know I'm the number one Mac hater out there, but really pleased with what I saw with Mac on that day, and especially defensively and from LT on the offensive side of the ball. Tom, any other points on this one, or are we getting ready to pick them?
No, the last thing that I will say about that defensive line in particular here, I think Malik Bolt is going to have a big game for them. He's a captain on that D line in particular. I wouldn't be surprised to see some big boys in there, like a second-year defensive lineman in Greg Palmer or Dominic Lamani in there, just to give some size and some weight and just to hold up those big Queens defensive or offensive linemen. Because once again, if you can keep those linebackers free so that they can flow, I think you're going to have a really good day here. So I'm expecting to see a lot of rotation to keep those defensive linemen fresh, but Malik Bolt has been around for a little while. He's been named a captain for a reason. So even though he's going up against Jazz Kyra and Nicholas Henning, I'm expecting something to come out of him in this one.
Well, let's pick them, and I'm taking Queens on the road to get their first W, but I think that much like last week, we're coming out of this game being like, I don't know if it'll be as close as the one against York, but I think we're still coming out of this one being like, I really like what Mac's doing here. And again, go back into the records, into that Tier D podcast. I said I'm actually really looking forward to the 2026 McMaster Marauders. So to me, Queens is picking up the dub on the road, but just more evidence that's saying that this is something special happening at Mac, just not on this week. Where are you going, Tom?
Yeah, this is a really tough one for me because I do really think that this is going to be a tight game. I truly believe that going back and forth, but I think that, like we were mentioning, there's a little bit more experience on that Queen side, especially with their offensive and defensive lines here and with that defensive secondary. Just not knowing enough about who Luke Thalman and the rest of this offense is. I am going to give the edge to Queens. I'm going to go with Queens in this one, but happy to be proven wrong, Marauders. Well, I'll be in the house, so you can let me know about it.
Most certainly, we will be live and direct from Ron Joyce. And again, Mac, that's the theme of your year. Just prove us wrong. And again, I love that Grandy even brought that up when we talked about the game. And to me, they did prove us wrong, if only for that 1 week. So keep it up, Mac. We will now move to the one game that we won't be in the house for. The York Lions taking their talents on the road to face the Ottawa GGs, the battle of the 1-0 teams. And Tom, I said this in the week one review podcast that though Ottawa didn't have as explosive an offensive showing against Waterloo week one, I am really excited for this quarterback battle we have this week between Josh Jansen and his Ottawa GGs and Keegan Hall and his York Lions. And though, again, I'm somewhat dubious of these box scores, we can read you out what Keegan did in week one, which was going 29 for 41 for 332 yards and 2 touchdowns. And we read off Jansen's game against Waterloo last week, obviously on the review, and I'll do it again, going 16 for 23, 222 yards, and 1 touchdown. You look at that and you say, well, Keegan had a better day on the on the whole. But much like we said with Jansen, of kind of being like, this is what we should expect. Like this should be the like if you play no better than this, you certainly shouldn't play worse than this. I look at that 29 for 41, 332 and two touchdowns. Is it unfair, especially because that's a young Mac defense, though they were really impressive, to say that with how we project this York offense to be and only get better, that maybe that 332 is a little high, but I don't think this should be far off what we expect Keegan to be able to produce week after week, as far as he'll probably have some of those games where he's getting into the four, maybe five touchdowns. I mean, we've already had at least three quarterbacks touching 400 plus yards week one, maybe a couple more. I can't recall off the top of my head. At least we know we had Barnett, Barnes in only about 3/4 of action, and Tristan Aboud touching those kind of numbers. So I think for both of these quarterbacks, we got to see them at sort of the I think you set the bar for what you should be able to produce, but with the Keegan numbers being that much higher than Josh Jansen, is that me being unfair of setting an unfair expectation of what we can expect for him in this system with everything that Coach Dennison is allowing him to do and the growing familiarity he will have with those players around him?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of the expectation, exactly like you're saying. And I don't think that you're wrong for saying that for Keegan and York. I mean, with the outstanding capabilities that we've already know that he has had in the past couple of seasons at McMaster, and now truly being, as you have dubbed him, the maestro of that entire offense here, where he's running that team, calling out the plays, even if he does have one of the coaches in his ear talking about this, I like this concept or I like this play, whatever. He's still the person who is calling it out for the receivers and changing the offensive line protection in front of him as well. So I think he's only going to get better as he sees things more and more here. And even when you look at Josh Jansen, and I know that he can be a great quarterback. We've seen it before. I mean, even in just the two games that he had against Laurier over the past couple of years and throwing for as many yards as he did is kind of showcase to that. But let's not forget that one touchdown for the 48-yard long that he has on that stat sheet was a hook and ladder play. It was a trick play that they had to do for his one lone touchdown pass against a Waterloo defense. And I'm not saying like a Waterloo defense like that's a bad thing. That's more so talking about how good this Waterloo defense really played against this Ottawa team. And they were able to shut down a lot of things that Ottawa really wanted to get going here. So to me, I don't think that we have seen Josh Jansen, like when you look at Keegan, you're saying, yeah, I think that that's a good representation of who you are. I think you're only going to go up from here. I think you're going to get better. I don't think that was a true showing of what Josh Jansen is able to do. And I think that Waterloo defense really stifled a lot of the stuff that he wanted to do, because once again, you take away that one touchdown and the 48 yards passing, he didn't even make 200 yards throwing the ball without that trick play. So there's a lot of different variations here, and there's a lot of things that I'm really looking out for on this Ottawa team, but certainly don't think that we've seen Josh Jansen's best.
I certainly agree. And you're totally right to bring up the nature of that extra 48 yards and the touchdown coming from that trickery. I think there's a lot of similarities when we look at this Waterloo defense and this York defense, if for no other reason, just thinking about Coach McNeil with Waterloo and Coach Knox with York being aggressive defensive coordinators, wanting to bring pressure from all sorts of angles, dropping guys into coverage where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. From that regards, let's stick with the Ottawa matchup offensively against the York defense. Thinking about this Greg Knox defense, the things that they can bring that are maybe similar, but also looking at what we saw in terms of them being a little beat up. Obviously, Brody Clark, someone who, again, folks thought we had him too low, being at, 21 overall at all of the OUA, and maybe we were, and a guy who, again, we've seen at his best, being one of the best linebackers in all of Canada. But we weren't, though we didn't get a confirmed response in terms of what had happened in that game, we certainly didn't like the look of it when he was kind of crutching off. And then the piece on Raekwon Lewis Gibbs in the defensive secondary being apparently injured for that first game, not knowing the status of if he's back. And then Peyton Ryder, who, as we talked about, as a 1-2 punch of him and Brody Clark, are perhaps, again, I love those names you were reading off with that McMaster linebacking core, truly. And we know there's some other great linebacking cores, but we know there's some other really good linebacker, but perhaps that combination of Brody Clark, being perhaps the best one. We liked what we saw from Austin Daisy, but what was the update that we kind of gleaned from different folks around the OUA in terms of what we can be expecting or what we're kind of projecting this York defense to look like this week, and just thinking about this Knox defense getting healthy and getting deeper into the playbook.
Yeah, I think that having Peyton Ryder come back into this is a massive pull for this. Austin Daisy did a fantastic job last week against McMaster, but Peyton Ryder was in that contention. He had, 50 tackles or something along those lines last year, along with his 1-2 punch and Brody Clark, like you were mentioning here. So getting him back on this defense is going to be huge. I don't know the status of Brody Clark, but like we mentioned on the review pod, the fact that I went up to him and blatantly asked, "Hey, how are you doing?" and he stared at me and didn't say anything as he hobbled off on crutches probably isn't a great sign. But like you were quick to point out, number 20, Kirill Nyari, who has played some DB, some half, and some Sam previously. I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in that Sam position and not really taking that much of a step down in that scenario. Brody Clark certainly he could be up there for President's Trophy winners along with Justin Pace and some of these other guys. But I really like previously what we've seen with Kirill, if he is the guy who gets into that spot, and I think he will have something more of a prominent role if that's the case. Once again, you talk about great players, and having to replace great players is always hard and it's never going to be an easy thing. But I feel confident in this York defense with Greg Knox at the helm, the mad scientist himself, dialing up pressures and making sure that Ottawa is not going to be comfortable in the back end. Josh Jansen's not just going to be able to sit back and pick them apart here. Whether it's those patented saw blitzes that Knox loves to bring or any other variation from that standpoint, I think that you will see a York defense that has come to play in this one. They do have a couple of key injuries, I believe, on that defensive line as well. Not sure if those guys are back. I don't think they played for McMaster. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but the more that these guys can get healthy and stay healthy, which is a crazy thing to say going into week 2, but still, I think this defense could continuously get better and better as we go on.
And though we both are in agreement that Jansen has more to give than what he did against the in that Waterloo game, that offensive line for Ottawa did a good job of keeping him clean. No sacks on the day. York, obviously, we were really impressed with what Jaden Dix was doing out there at defensive end for them. So as another body that Ottawa's going to have to account for is going to be huge. Now, just sticking with the theme of players we didn't see in week 1 on the defensive side of the ball, Daniel Briere was someone who we were miffed at not seeing him in the Ottawa Waterloo game. Was it a product that the first quarter and change of that game wasn't on the stream or whatnot? But you did get word about 44's status. What do we know about the possibility of Briere returning or just where he's at right now?
Well, so far as we know, as it stands, he was not on that dress roster for Ottawa going into the Waterloo game here. So don't know if that's an injury, don't know what his status is, but having him out is certainly a big blow to that defense. They've got some other great guys around, but once again, you start talking about key guys and key scenarios, and Daniel Briere certainly is one of those. Jackson Brashear, I think, should be back and should be playing and should be healthy and ready to go here, which is another great. And we talked about how important Riley Hildebrand is constantly here and how well he's been able to go. So I think that with those guys, you'll still have a very stout Ottawa defense for sure. But if Daniel Briere can make a comeback here, that would just be another huge boon for these Ottawa GGs.
And as far as that front seven for Ottawa, yes, Briere is huge in there. But as we saw last week, having Riley Hildebrand back in the middle, in the mix as probably one of the more dominant interior defensive linemen we have in the OUA this year. And really excited to see what kind of numbers he puts up as the year progresses. But I think the matchup, because, we were talking about Queens maybe having the best defensive secondary in the OUA, and it's a great case to be able to make. But when you think about the presence of guys like Patrick Cumberbatch and Denny Ferdinand, Jackson Brashear kind of being in that defensive secondary as well, and then thinking about how they're going to match up against guys like CJ Vincent and Avery Ford, pardon me, sorry, Avery. What am I saying? Avery Ford. The battle of the Averys in this one. Noah Avery and Avery Ford. I'm going to have to. Anyhow, but with those guys, your guy and Nick Adair and Avante getting into the mix, this is where, and again, where I think that this is going to be a game where if these teams are playing as they hope to on the offensive side of the ball, I could see there being some explosive offensive days for these guys. But at least as far as the Ottawa side of things is concerned, handling them, you look across the board and you can say, well, we know we got guys in Denny and in Patrick Cumberbatch that we feel pretty good in saying without providing too much else support, whichever of these guys in Vincent Ford, Adair, McCoy coming out of the backfield, or when they want to line him up in that piranha position, as we've been led to believe they call it, you can be comfortable knowing that two of those guys are covered. It sounded like Evan Guizzo is someone that they're looking to, to be an impact player from them. But that's where I'm most excited in this game, to be able to see how the defensive secondary for Ottawa is able to slow this down. We did see McCoy hobble out of that game. Sounded like, from what he told us, calf pull. So that's obviously something that, on the one hand, might not be major, but might be lingering for a bit. And obviously, we are hoping for him to have, the best possible season we can. Love that young man. That's the matchup to me that you have to watch in this one. How that defensive secondary of Ottawa's, that year in, year out, is as good as anyone else, takes care of Keegan Hall, possible MVP, Heck Crichton type dude in the OUA and in U Sports with these weapons he has offensively.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see what Ottawa's response is going to be to a lot of this, of seeing a hurry up offense like York has, and having Keegan with the ability to look over and be like, hey, we've got a two-man concept, and that's going right into the teeth of Denny Ferdinand and Patrick Cumberbatch. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Let's then swap that over here, or let's look over to this side and change up a concept that I like a little bit better against the matchups that we have here. So having that, as a lot of people have said, that coach on the field aspect with Keegan Hall in this setting, being able to change the play or change route combinations against the strength of that team, which is their defensive secondary, I think will be a huge boon to him in this regard as well. The only other thing here is that be careful with how long you're going to be taking here to allow things to set up, because you're going to have a Riley Hildebrandt who is going to be in some one-on-one scenarios, especially at that three tech. And if you give him enough time, he will get into the backfield. He will start to make your life a little bit tough from that standpoint. Let's not forget, even against McMaster, while they didn't have so many sacks, you and I were watching, they hit Keegan a fair bit. And it was all clean and everything else, but because Keegan's rolling out, or he's trying to create some more time to find his guys down the field, he's taking hits, and he's getting hit like he was at McMaster. If that happens again in this Ottawa game and just throughout the season, that could spell some trouble for York.
And as you've alluded to, as we were privy to learn about what Keegan is able to do, he's calling up those protections as well. So just in addition to saying, well, they got Denny and Cumberbatch over here, they got Hildebrand right here. Not only am I going to look to try and set something up to the field, I'm rolling out that way. And we know that he is great moving on his, he's great at making off-platform throws, being able to escape pressure. His pocket presence is outstanding. Last thing I want to bring up in here, and this is where, to me, we've alluded to this in talking about Jansen having, better games ahead of him, though certainly you're not leaving that Waterloo game being unhappy. But to me, much like we talked about with Jared Kasari, and recognizing that that's going to be the outlier performance in terms of what he was limited to against Western, when we look at Charles Asselin, King Charles Asselin, 13 for 21 on the ground, yes, one rushing touchdown as well, and 2 receptions for 8 yards, is certainly the not even bare minimum. That is a bad game by King Charles numbers. Gets a couple kickoff returns, or gets the one kickoff return as well. We know how explosive he can be there. And when I think about this York defense perhaps being a little banged up, and the way you talked about the Greg Knox patented saw blitz, bringing those two guys off the edge, I think similarly, the way you talked about maybe Mac utilizing their running backs leaking out of the backfield to be able to get away from perhaps a stronger box play. Well, we certainly know, especially if Suleiman Kamara can continue to be maybe that go-to running back to allow Aslan to be open to do more things in the passing game, some of those gadget plays. That's where, to me, I have to just, based on, is it likely that what's likelier, that Charles Asselin has another underperformed game like he did week 1, or that we see him play up to the level we expect? And I'm much more going to bet in favor of that. And as we keep talking about the sort of multiplying effect that has on a young running back like Kamara, and then what that allows for Noah Avery as their top receiver, for Romeo Lucier, Robin Couillard, and then Tristan Gilbert-Thibault, who we mentioned was kept off the stat sheet. And that just, like, again, of Lucier, Couillard, and Gilbert-Thibault as these second-year receivers who just, I'm so excited to see just that youth there for Ottawa. That's, to me, the biggest thing And I'm curious for you how York, knowing that that's probably, well, just knowing that Aslan is the go to guy from this, how that is going to impact them, or whether York's just going to say, look, we are coming with a game plan to attack this offense as a whole. If one guy beats us, he beats us, but not one way or the other. To me, Aslan is having a bounce back game and is going to look to be a difference maker in this one.
Certainly think he'll be more involved in this offense. I think that he has to be more involved for this offense to really take off and to be as explosive as it can be. The more time and energy that you're focusing on King Charles here, the less that you are in Josh Jansen, and that's really where we can see him shine and do a lot of great things. I'd almost be tempted to say if Brody Clark is back and playing here, Brody, you're just spying Charles the entire way. If he goes out for a pass, you go with him. If he stays in the box, you stay with him, and then try to take that guy away and allow the rest of this, force the rest of this Ottawa offense to really go off and to beat you from that standpoint here. But if Brody Clark is not playing in this one, how are you going to have a response here? Are you just going to allow your guys and say, hey, Peyton Ryder, you're the middle linebacker for a reason here. If they try to run that ball, you got to stop them, along with obviously the rest of that great defensive line, Jaden Dix, and the rest of them from that standpoint as well here. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. I do agree with you that King Charles is going to start to get more and more touches here as things go on. But I don't think Greg Knox is just going to lean back and say, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want here. I think he's going to have some stuff dialed up against these guys.
Well, Tom, I think I'm ready to make my call on this. I'll leave it up to you. Is there anything else, just storylines or things to watch for in this game? I think Nathan Walker, we can expect to have a much better kicking game than he did last week. I think it's only fair if we're talking about guys like Aslan and Kasarian saying that, like, well, they're going to play better because of what we've seen before. They'll play better than what we saw. And I don't think Walker, I didn't get to speak to the young man. I'm sure he wasn't happy with his performance and knows he can do better. I mean, and Zachary Copeland for Ottawa was, 14 points on the day, 4 for 4 on field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. And to me, that's what we should expect from Copeland. Ottawa just seemingly always is pumping out really strong kickers in that regard. But I'll just throw it back to you. Anything else you wanted to highlight in this one before we make our picks?
Yeah, the last one that I wanted to talk about, we spent a lot of time talking about that York offense and Keegan Hall, but I think this running game from what we saw against McMaster, I think this York running game is a little bit better than what I thought it was going to be going into this. Obviously, you've got Avante McCoy and Melkus Alunga back there, and they are great in their regards, but Greg Seeley actually did a lot of stuff that I really liked. They gave him the ball a few times. According to here, it's 10 attempts for 56 yards, but I like how he ran, and I like what we saw from them, and I'm expecting that run game to take over just a little bit more, albeit right now going into the teeth of Riley Hildebrand, maybe Jackson Brashear or the other linebackers there may not be the best time, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that run game really start to develop a little bit more and more. And like we've been talking about with a couple other teams, if you can make sure that teams aren't just pinning their ears back and coming after Keegan Hall, if they're double checking to see, hey, we've got a run read here and he's giving the ball off, and now I don't know if I have to like slow up and give Keegan an extra second or two to find a guy and throw the ball. That's a recipe for disaster for defenses as well. So I'm expecting this York run game to pick up as this goes on as well.
Definitely have the potential there. And I think when it comes back to the injury question marks, a big piece as well is that York offensive line that we were told was banged up, missing a few guys, don't know their status. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're making our picks a bit blind at some key spots, thinking about guys like Daniel Briere, thinking about Peyton Ryder, Brody Clark, that offensive line, Avante's status. To me, though, there's more question marks on the York side of things with those injuries. I expect Jansen and Aslan to have bounce back games, being at home and that being huge for them. And to that run game part for York, I think Riley Hildebrandt, whether York's O-line is as healthy as they hope to, or especially otherwise, can do a formidable job, whether Briere's behind him or not, in slowing that down and getting after Keegan and making him uncomfortable, adding in Denny and adding in Patrick Cumberbatch to start to blanket some of those guys. I think it'll be a great game. I'm hoping for a lot of offense on this one. I think it's what we're going to get. I'm going to take the GGs at home to move up to 2-0 and level out York at 1-1, but I'm not doing that with full confidence, but that's where I'm going to go on this one. Tom, where are you liking this game to go?
I think with everything that we've seen here, and certainly the ceiling that we've seen, or at least what we've seen so far from both of these teams, I'm going with the York Lions. I'm going with them to make the travel up to Ottawa and to come away with this one. I think there's some more capabilities that we have here for this York team. I wouldn't be surprised to see York score early. Not even to score a lot, but just to score early. And when that happens, that then changes your mentality that you have on offense, or it starts to put a little bit more pressure on these GGs and getting them out of the rhythm that they want to be in. And I'm just not 100% sold just yet on this Ottawa GG offense. I didn't see what I wanted to see from them, albeit because of a great effort by the Waterloo defense, but I'm going with York in this one.
It'll be a great game one way or the other, and a game that unfortunately we're going to have to tune in via OUA TV. But maybe they took that feedback and made some adjustments. Who knows? Let's go from the one game we're not in the house to, I mean, Tom, it doesn't feel right when we're attending games separate from one another, but it just happens to be the case that this week we're both in the house for separate 7 p.m. kickoffs. Let's go to the one that you're going to be live and direct for, the Laurier home opener, where they're going to take on the team coming from the end of the 401, leaving the safety of the Golden Arches, but bringing along the blue collar and gold swagger of JP the Don Cercelli and the whole family affair that the Windsor Lancers tout as they open up their season coming off the week 1 bye to travel into Kitchener-Waterloo. Thomas is a Windsor team that I'm a little frustrated with based on their online roster, because you were made privy to possibly some of the guys that were back and not back. I was a little confused seeing certain guys on there that I thought were definitely not back or who were. I don't know what's going on. Is the one team we haven't seen yet. Let me pass it over to you to perhaps set the table based on what you've been able to hear about who we might be able to expect for Windsor at some of these key positions and possibly some players that might not be there as well.
So it's a little interesting because they do have a 2025 roster up, and we've seen Windsor in the past just kind of copy and paste and put some guys in there. But there are a number of guys who are not back, who are not on this roster, and we thought for the most part that this was their confirmed, but we are showing Joey Zorn on the roster, and apparently he is not back. If that is the case, my heart is shattered because I love watching that man run, but I'll believe it when I see it, to be perfectly honest with you. However, Wegby Mumbo is 100% back, and also he has changed his name to number 5, so he is Mumbo number 5, and that is just so outstanding. Going off, it looks like this is Nick Domofsky's team. It's his year to start in this one. There was some talk about Josh Fullis as the other QB kind of pushing for that spot. As far as I know, it is Domofsky's job. And replacing that middle linebacker looks to be number 0 here, Marco Piccioni out of the Guelph, Ontario and Cambridge Lions. So lots of new faces in certain spots. I mean, having Estevan Acebo-Dotsi and Robert Springer back is massive if that's the case. Those are 2 of your best guys that we have, but Windsor's always a team that's going to have a strong tendency to bring folks up from the States and be a part of this here, and there's not a whole ton of people that I'm seeing in here, so I'd be interested to see who else is going to be a part of this team. Andrew Delaney also going to be another one of those running backs in there as well, but I have to imagine with Christopher John and with Joey Zorn being gone, that's a big blow to that running back room.
Well, most certainly there. And, just in sticking with the linebacking core as well, and obviously losing Maceo Christmas and Jason Rashotzi, another guy that I was actually devastated, and I had to do a double check here to see that he isn't on this 2025 roster, is Trey Ranson, who was a first-year kid playing for them last year who looked really solid, that I'm not seeing, and I'll believe it when I do finally see it or not see it, whether he's there or not. But another American they brought in who looked really strong for them. So again, that's going to be interesting to see how they backfill that in. Off the jump, just talking Windsor football. Huge shout out to our guy Danny Skelton. Not back with this team, though he had the one last year to play. We've obviously seen as rich an era of OUA quarterbacks. And we were kind of going through it as an exercise beforehand of being like, man, even the guys that you'd say are sort of, lower tier quarterbacks, if you will, in the league, you're very happy with what we're seeing so far, early returns on the season, small sample size, though that might be, and saying like, what a great like we have 11 quarterbacks. Frankly, we have more than 11 good quarterbacks in the OUA right now. It's awesome to see. And Danny Skelton is a guy who, like we said, at his best, when he was consistently getting those QB1 reps going back 2 years ago, we were having those conversations of, whether it's, Taylor, Evan, Keegan as sort of that big three at the top, and the ascension of Tristan Aboud, and wondering what Alex Vriek can become. But he was certainly a name that was consistently in those conversations as a top 5 guy. Not knowing the full story of why he's not coming back for this year, don't really want to speculate on that. But again, just a guy who made this era of Windsor football really special. Obviously, that running game was number 1 offensively for them. And as we talked about last week a ton, we'll continue to say it as we maybe question decisions that are made by coaches, recognizing we're not in those rooms. We don't know what goes into decisions that are made, even if sometimes we're very frustrated about it. See our Carlton conversation from the week 1 review. But a guy who, again, was kind of moved around a little bit, and we've said it year in, year out, how much we don't like that as a philosophy of especially using your quarterbacks. So a guy that toughed it out through some pretty, tumult, I'll say again. I don't know what the conversations were going with those guys, but just more than anything, just our quick salute to a great quarterback that we saw playing OUA football, who had this team in a position a couple times to possibly make a deep run into the playoffs. So just first and foremost, Danny Skelton, great job by you on your OUA career. Salute to you, sir.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure, getting a chance to watch this young man do his thing. I mean, I'll never forget 2 years ago, that home opener that you and I were both at, Mac versus Windsor, and Windsor goes off, and to see an outstanding play by Windsor and putting them on our map to be like, wow, this is a team to really watch for. And your outrage going to me being like, why did I pick Mac? I should never have gone against the Don. Screaming at me as Danny Skelton really did a lot of great things. And while Joey Zorn and the rest of that team were great, that first game was Skelton throwing the ball around the field, rushing into the end zone a couple of times. We didn't really see Joey Zorn really go off here until that Guelph game later on in that season. So loved everything that I saw from Danny Skelton, and wish nothing but the best for him as he continues on in his life and going into his career.
Absolutely. Now, this defense for Windsor, obviously we've seen year in, year out, one of the best that they have. Coach Donovan, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. We've obviously seen Mufta move the heck out of our way. Gelly move to another program in the States, last year being the first year out of the Windsor program. Seeing Kaladia Musin now graduate out of the program. Big blows for them, especially on that front line. Malik George probably being the guy they're going to rely on most on that front 7. Liam Hoskins, linebacker type, who can also probably walk down on that to that D line. And seeing, yes, Robert Springer in the back end, huge. But Ethan John is a name that we were playing around with as a guy who, when we talk about non-safety, defensive back type players, because I think he's ends up being listed as like a halfback, field half. They rotate him around a lot of times. He comes into the box as one of those guys, as a safety, non-middle linebacker type who could be in the running for President's Award, President's Trophy contention. To me, the success of this defense comes down to what John and what Springer, sort of naming 2 predominant names on that defense, are going to be able to do to step up big time for them, and what a test it's going to be for them off the jump going into the House of the Champions in this Laurier team with Cal Wither, and what we saw from him week 1 against Guelph, to be able to hold it down. Ethan John, Robert Springer on that back end against this Laurier offense. So to be able to sort of transition into Laurier, what are you expecting out of those guys and be able to prepare for this Laurier team? A Laurier team that they've had really strong outings against over the last couple of years.
Well, first and foremost, being in Laurier's position, having 2 week 1 opponents, technically, with having to prep for 2 teams that you haven't seen relevant game film on going into this, is such a pain. True. Because you're going back and trying to speculate who's going to be starters and everything else. But I think that Windsor has their work cut out for them, especially in that defensive secondary. I loved everybody that we saw in there. I mean, we had Robert Springer and Ethan John on our top 55 list, so that should tell you what we think of those 2 guys. I believe Harrison Daly is another guy who's going to be back there as well and contributing in there. But I mean, we've mentioned this so many times, and while we had John and Springer are pretty high up, I mean, the receiving core for Laurier, I think all of them were in our top 20 for this, and there's a reason for that. So this is going to be a very tough matchup for Windsor in this one. I still think that Callum Wither is only going to get better and better as time goes on here, getting more used to the Canadian game, getting back into it, and getting just on the same page with his outstanding receiving core. So I'd be interested to see what Windsor's game plan is going to be to try to disrupt things here. Certainly, I have to assume that they're going to go into this being like, okay, we know there's weapons all over this field, but we cannot let Tayshaun Jackson out of our sights here because he will burn us anytime he touches the ball, whether that's on specials or on offense. So when you look at this, and even I'll pose this question to you, if you're Pat Donovan looking at this Laurier offense being like, okay, so we really need to stop everybody because everybody can really torch us here. Where do you start?
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, number one, we know the names of who's made that defensive line special, but there's also that institutional trust that this defense is just seemingly able to produce great pass rushers and people to slow the ball down. The interesting thing about, to me, that combo of Jackson and Scott in the backfield is that while, yes, they're taking handoffs, in some ways, they're not those bruising type guys. Like they're really, aside from, I guess, if you want to talk about Derek Bassick Hayden as someone who's going to run you over, and frankly, I guess our guy in Leomi Ojatalayo probably being another guy that's going to put his shoulder down. It's all their skill guys are very are I'm trying to think of the word to say it. I mean, actually, Ryan Hughes put a big hit on a guy, which is impressive because he weighs like $150 soaking wet or something like that. But it's almost like a game of just trying to we running around the farm trying to catch a chicken. Like that's how I feel like it is with this Laurier defense. So being able to say, with your defensive backs, being able to kind of put that umbrella over it all, and Esteban Acebo-Dotsi, if we were more, I don't think he was on our top 55. I think because all summer long, we're seeing him on an Argos roster and being like, I don't think he's back. And just being able to say, look, we have to umbrella it, let nothing big happen, and just rally to the ball. And if they're going to score, have it be slow, methodical, chunk it down the field, but just being able to rally and prevent anything big over the top, I think is how you have to get it. And whether it's Malik George or that guy in the front seven, maybe putting Hoskins at a defensive end spot, because we know this Laurier offensive line is going to be strong. And as far as the battle in the trenches, without having seen how this front seven and D-line for Windsor is going to look, my inclination is to say that Laurier is winning that matchup. I think when it's all said and done, you just have to be able to say nothing big, rally to the ball, and just support wherever you can. Because if you give any of these guys too much space, I mean, we saw it with Ethan Jordan taking like a 5 to 7 out route to the crib for a 70-yard touchdown. And so it's like, I mean, to say the least, you can't let up those big plays, and just being able to say, okay, if he's catching it at 5 yards, he gets no more than 7 yards. If that rusher gets to the second level, then we have to rally it, and we have to be the ones laying the boom and making them feel us. So I think that's how you have to do it. And I think that kind of matches a bit of the Patrick Donovan mentality with this defense, is that they're a bunch of like hard-hitting SOBs who fly around the ball and make plays. And when you add in the fact that Acebo-Dotsi and Springer are two of the best ball hawking DBs in the OUA, in U Sports, you hope that, okay, can we make that key play? Can Ethan Jordan rally into the box and just punch that ball out when, maybe Tayshaun or Jackson or Quentin Scott's trying to dance a little bit, and then you can punch that ball out? That's really, to me, where they're going to have to be able to rely on. Because, you talked about Tayshaun Jackson, make me think about another guy that we're not seeing for Windsor anymore in Javoni Cunningham, not just from what he can do offensively as a receiver, but arguably the best return man we had in the last 4 years, one of them up there with Tayshaun. So saying all that, I think that's the philosophy defensively for them. But like flipping the script then, we're going to see, as you were alluding to, probably the Nick Demovsky show, Waby Mambo number 5, RB1. Not entirely sold if Zorn's out of there. Obviously, our guy in Liam Talbot, and exciting to see how they're going to utilize him as that gadget guy, both as a receiver and as someone who you can hand the ball off, often on some jet sweeps. And I think they have Colby Ginn back as a receiver who's been with the program for a little bit. I have to double check that. But also adding in, talking about Liam Talbot, we talked about, he has his two younger brothers who are coming off their first year in the program. Zach Talbot on the defensive side of the ball at DB, and Brendan, who is at receiver. Maybe one of those guys can step up. Daniel Hector has been in that program for a bit. Yes, I'm seeing Colby Ginn's name as well. Offensively, I like it. So there is part of me that still has so much trust in what Patrick Donovan can do with these guys to be able to say, can you stop Laurier from scoring? No, but I think they can make him uncomfortable and do those things to maybe limit the big plays. Offensively, more than anything, with how good we saw Laurier being defensively, despite off that the big game that Aboud ultimately put up, that's where I'm worried about Windsor. We've obviously known that offense has been, aside from that run game, the thing that's perhaps held them back in the past in quarterback play. We've seen some nice things from Demoski in his early returns, but he also missed so much of last year. Offensively, against this Laurier defense, to me, that's the biggest mismatch in this. I like what Windsor might still be able to do against that Laurier offense, but it's that side of the ball where I don't think, or I just don't know. I'm curious, and I guess I'll pass it back to you, how Windsor might try to attack Laurier, especially based on them also seeing a week of tape of how Guelph ultimately was able to move it against them.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that was due to Guelph has a great offense in general here, but that Guelph offensive line was really doing some great work. Like we mentioned, I think 4 or 5 seconds was the average here that Tristan Aboud was just sitting with the pocket going through his reads. Now, that's with no Marcus Tenney in there, and that's having to rely a little bit more on Mateo La Quintana to do some stuff, and that a phenomenal Guelph offensive line. I think with those guys being back on that Laurier defense, I think that they're going to get some pressure on Demovsky. They're going to hit him a few times. So how well he can kind of respond from that aspect. But even on the opposite side of this here, you're thinking, okay, there's outstanding receivers pretty much everywhere you got. The way to best stop them is to get to Callum Wither. Let's not forget this Laurier offensive line is damn good themselves. I mean, with guys like Josh Rietfeld, Cody Blackshaw, Spencer Wallace, Tyler Potvin, like there's a lot of outstanding talent on this Laurier offensive line that's not just going to sit back and say, oh yeah, especially with a defense that doesn't have Kaladia Musin anymore, for sure, we're just going to allow you to get back there. I think they're going to provide some outstanding protection here. Worst case scenario, I mean, we saw it in the Guelph game. Our guy in Coach Stones Galloway just says, you know what? Despite all these receivers, F it. Let's just go double tight end with Ryan Spade and Laomi if I really want to, so that I can leak those guys out if they really start loading up the box to try to stop us here. And then I'll just allow Quentin Scott and Tayshawn Jackson to find their way and weave their way through and take off and burn these guys. So that to me is the biggest question mark here. Who are the players that are coming back in for this Windsor defense going up against this Laurier offense that's one of the best in the country here? And how are you going to try to limit what this offense is able to do here? Because if they're able to run the ball or to do anything they want at will, it's tough to stop those guys.
Totally. And I'm thinking about, sitting in Ron Joyce with you 2 years ago, watching Windsor week 1, and just the sheer joy, despite my frustration in making the wrong pick, because I hate picking him wrong, but the sheer joy of being able to say, okay, who's this guy Mufta in the middle? Who's this guy Kaladi on the end? And obviously so many more of those guys that, it's with Windsor, I think, much like with some of the Ottawa teams, where we're less familiar year in, year out, and Windsor that much more, especially with the Americans they bring in, there's the part of me that, to spoil my pick, I'm still going to have Laurier at home on this one. That I kind of get that feeling of night game in Laurier, much like a night game at Mac. Windsor coming in for the first game in a year where we're kind of unsure about some things. Like, we love how this team recruits and the coaching on all sides of the ball, where I'm thinking, Laurier, we know what they're bringing. And not to say that we can predict everything that they're going to do, because they always are going to have some tricks up their sleeves. With Windsor, there's some more of those unknowns. And partly because of those unknowns that were made because of great players that we've seen leave the program, graduate out, it makes you feel, your gut reaction is that's going to be hard to bounce back from. But as you alluded to, of Laurier having to prep 2 weeks in a row for teams where you haven't seen things, though you hadn't seen Guelph play in a matchup before week 1, there certainly was more certainty of
Mhm.
saying, well, we think we know what this Guelph team's going to look like. And there's just a part of me, and again, I'm taking Laurier at home, and not to end the conversation, of being like, someone is going to step up on this Windsor team that we're going to say, oh, okay, that's why the word coming out of Windsor, as you were able to discover, is that they think that they perhaps have as much skill on their team as they have in years past. And maybe that was just blowing smoke. I don't know. I think it's a pretty reputable program and the way they comport themselves. So I guess I'll sort of just again confirm that my pick. I am going to take Laurier. I can't wait to see what this Windsor team looks like, and can't wait to see. Well, number one, is your boy and Zorn out there, or is he truly gone? And just who's going to be that next guy up for them, particularly on the defensive side, because that's really where they've been one of the most special teams in the nation, is on that defensive side of who's going to step up for them. I don't know who it is. Obviously, we can talk about the known knowns are great, but I just have that feeling there's going to be some guys that we're like, okay, this is Windsor just somehow produces this year in year out.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. One of my favorite lines that I had heard from talking with a few folks around the Windsor facility here is the Don keeps things pretty close to the sweater vest, so it's tough to really understand what's going on here.
That's gold.
So it's really tough to see who's coming out, who's going to be in key scenarios here for these Windsor Lancers. But I do agree with you. I wouldn't even be surprised if at halftime this game is really close. If not, maybe Windsor even leading it by a small margin because they were able to have. There's so many new guys here. You're not really 100% certain on what's going to happen. But I am going with Laurier in this one. Even if Windsor is able to surprise them in the first half with the unbelievable coaching staff that Laurier has, and I know we say this a lot, but like, really, Coach Stones Galloway, Ron Van Werkirk, the head guy, Michael Falls. I mean, you've got a former CFL All-Star in Mike Daly just coaching up receivers, or sorry, DBs, and like the list of guys you could go forward through. Obviously, our guy and Coach Scotto and my guy and Christian helping out with defense. Like, I think the great aspect of a coaching staff is their ability to make changes and adjustments into the second half. Not to say that Windsor doesn't have that, but along with the great coaching staff and the great players that Laurier has, I'm going with the Golden Hawks in this one.
And you talked about Marcus Tenney missing that game. It was also brought to our attention that Omari Hastings was a bit limited in that game against Guelph as well. A fun exercise, a fun activity I think we should do at some point, because, there's so many great matchups coaching wise on this one, is just the idea of, Coach Scotto versus Coach Beardy. I mean, obviously not versus, because their groups aren't going up against one another. But we obviously have so much love for all these offensive line coaches across the league. And this is, though, of course, it's hard to compare their offensive lines in the game against one another. You'd probably want to compare them against a neutral opponent, so on and so forth. But if you were going to build your fantasy coaching staff roster, that's an interesting conversation to have between Randy Beardy and Coach Scotto with the Laurier Golden Hawks. But luckily, that's some content for another day. Hopefully, I didn't give away too much good content on that one. We're both going Laurier, but can't wait to see how Windsor's looking. Now, while you are enjoying a little Laurier Windsor action, I will be in the house, Varsity Stadium, under the lights for the Saturday, the end of the Saturday slate of games, where the Waterloo Warriors are rolling into town to take on the 1-0, sitting atop the OUA standings in not just, well, in the standings and also amongst a number of offensive category, U of T Blues on this day. Tom, we were really impressed with what we saw from Waterloo, both sides of the ball, really liking what they're looking like. And U of T, I don't know what to expect from them. Because, hey, you want to be upset with us because we didn't expect that Scott Barnett would accumulate a third of their entire offensive passing production in one game and throw for one fewer touchdown than they netted on the whole year. Oh, golly, real bad job by us for not predicting that against the Carleton team that, though they've disappointed for a few years, part of that disappointment comes from the fact that you look at the talent on that team on both sides of the ball and you say, they should be a lot better than they are. So I'm slightly confused going into this game because we have a Waterloo team who is, right there with Mac and with Queens and certainly Guelph. as teams who picked up losses. Of the 5 teams that picked up losses in week 1, there's only one team in Carleton who you come out being like, okay, the sky might be falling. Those other 4 teams, certainly including this Waterloo team, you say, hey, look, you never like to fall behind the 8 ball like that. And for Waterloo, we haven't, I haven't certainly talked to their coaching staff to kind of get a sense of what they think their expectations are for the year, but we certainly have it in a growth year for them, the prove us wrong category, all those sorts of things. But for U of T, hey, you know what? If come even just like the Battle of Toronto Red Blue Bowl, Argo Cup, Matt Dean's Bowl in week 3, we're saying, hey, 2 weeks in a row, Barnett's throwing for 600 yards plus, and we'll be in the house for that one as well. I'll consider saying that maybe we were really off on them, but just based on the information that we had, I don't know what to think about this team offensively. Now, I'll throw it to you with just the one last thing of course, week 1 last year, you talked about this in the Carleton recap of that game of saying when they went on the road against Waterloo, that was perhaps as sharp as that offense looked. And again, a week 1 game that probably accounted for an outsized percentage of their overall offensive production on the year. Interesting. That seems like a trend. But I don't have a read on U of T right now. I'd love to think that Chris Joseph, Jake Oseen, and Thomas Roberts can continue to be this 3-headed beast of a defense. But Kevin McNeil's coming into this game, having seen what they did to them last year, having seen what they did to attack a Carleton team who seemingly couldn't adjust to that offensive attack. To me, this is going to be a different type of affair on this day. What's your initial reaction looking at this matchup?
To be honest with you, I completely see and I agree with a lot of the takes that you have there. I don't think we're going to go into this being like, oh yeah, Scott Barnett's just going to throw for 600 yards every single game. But what I did really like about U of T and Scott Barnett in particular is that he took what was given. It's not like he was forcing balls into tight windows or making unbelievable, spectacular throws into the breadbasket. He saw guys were open, he saw the field, and he got the ball to his guys. I mean, that dart to Thomas Roberts for what, like 100 yards or 100 yards plus all the way down the field. That was purely going through his reads, seeing that post was open and hitting him in stride, so that allowing Thomas Roberts with that speed that he has to just take off and run with it. That's not just because he's, I see a small window in here and I'm going to fit it through like a dime hole. It was, I'm reading the defense effectively, I'm finding my guys that are open, and I'm trusting in my guys in order to make those great plays. And I think that mentality and that process, if that continues to happen, we'll start to see U of T with a lot of success. Because I do think that the rest of this receiving core, yes, we saw like 3 guys catch the ball, but the rest of this receiving core for Toronto are really solid as well. And getting the ball to them with space around them is going to cause issues for a lot of other defenses going into this. So I am more optimistic about what this U of T offense could be than what I saw this. Certainly, I don't think we're going to see record breaking every time, but like I mentioned, that was due to smart plays, taking what was given to them, and just allowing his guys to really go off and start playing here. I am really interested to see, to be honest with you, we can get into this a little bit more, but the offensive and defensive line play, because we love our offensive linemen. I went through the U of T offensive line. At right tackle, number 69, Gavin Himian. At right guard, number 75, Cole Davenport. Number 60, Sebastian Holden. Our left guard, number 63, Devin Dinza. And then at left tackle, number 67, James Donald. They're going to need to continually get better and better and better as things go on. And while guys like Marcus Miller and Jack Lausch, and especially Marcus Ola, Dominique Walker for this Waterloo defense, seeing guys blitz off the edge or seeing additional pressures that Coach K-Mac loves to bring as well is going to force guys to stay on top of their toes and to know, hey, what are your rules on your slide pros? Are you picking up the Sam or not? Are you picking up the half or not? Because best believe they're going to be blitzing at some point in this game. So having that mentality and understanding that this offensive line is going to really need to continually get better and better and better. Not to say that they were bad against Carleton by any means, but if you want to continue to play with the big boys, it's the O&D line play that really needs to step up.
I love that that's where you went, because that's where my mind was going to, because obviously for you to be able to say Scott Barnett is going through his reads on that Thomas Roberts touchdown, especially just seeing the free safety cheat over so hard to, from the, I guess, the viewing perspective of the left side of the field. I can't remember if it was field or boundary, and then just being able to say, oh, he's going against the grain of this post, throw it open. He needs to be able to have time to be able to make that read, make that play happen. So shout out to those guys. And I love that you're highlighting that defense for Waterloo on the front end of it. But then you add in just as well to say, be able to say, like, as you were alluding to, when they start to bring those pressures, which we know to expect out of K-Mac's defenses, Keyshawn Bowen and our dude and Michael Omaseni, and what they can do to be able to maybe slow down that offense and be able to give them trouble and make Scott Barnett a little more uncomfortable. That's a really interesting matchup to be able to see. And, again, though it was frustrating to see Carleton so out of sorts, especially just because of the talent we know that's on that team. Defensively, we were slightly more skeptical, but still, even after the fact, going through it and being like, they got ballers across the board. The Grayson being like, well, you do have a new defensive coordinator, and then taking time to adjust and calls and this, that, and the third. Just knowing alone that this defense for K-Mac, and obviously we've talked about this seemingly every week, NSU Latmore not being there is a huge loss for them. But just knowing that systemically, they should be a much stronger opponent than what U of T was seeing against Carleton, I think will go a long way. That you're not going to get a major bust of a safety just blowing his coverage for someone to come open over the field, especially with that week of film to be able to break down from them. I don't think our conversation about this U of T offense against the Waterloo defense is over just yet. But let's flip the script, mildly, just to talk about what we can think about from Nick Orr and this offense for Waterloo. Again, Orr goes 19 for 20, 210 in the air, no touchdowns, no interceptions, picks up 44 on the ground. Quentin Springer right behind him. And again, so happy to see Anthony Miller in the game as well for them. Roy Vanderveer also getting some carries for them. Carleton, obviously, when Elijah came in, was able to capitalize on both him having a great arm, that great receiving core he has, but then how that opens up the running game for them, knowing that they can do so many more read options with him to be able to, allocate blockers to the front side of a play and leave an unblocked guy for Elijah. With this Waterloo team, we know Nick Orr has the ability to scramble. I don't take him to be quite the athlete of Elijah, but when you think about how we saw Carleton eventually get success in switching over to Barnes, with what we saw from Waterloo, yes, staying off the board in terms of getting into the end zone, but where they had success moving the ball against an Ottawa defense that we really like, Daniel Briere not being in their side. How do you see, and again, with Waterloo being able to watch that game and break down that film, how do you see Coach Conway positioning his guys to have success against this defense, and especially perhaps knowing that, sure, 600 yards, probably not getting, but, there's a good chance that this U of T offense could be putting some points up, and you're going to need to match it, maybe score for score. How do you see our guy in Conway prepping his guys for this matchup?
Well, consistently speaking, and it's an adage that's out there, been out there for the longest time, the best form of defense against an explosive offense is to make sure that they stay off the field. So if Waterloo can find a way to get back to that outstanding run game that we saw a couple years ago out of this team, especially with Quentin Springer and Anthony Miller in the backfield, and if they're both healthy and ready to go here, that's, in my mind, got to be the mindset here. Take that ball for Waterloo, having to move the ball, obviously, in order to keep it, but move it down in chunks. Don't need to go for big plays. Chew up that clock as best as possible, and don't leave those guys with a ton of time in order to make this outstanding offense that we've seen, at least in week one, able to come alive again. I think that's got to just be the mentality for Waterloo's offense as it continues on. Even Nick Orr, I mentioned this on the review pod. I'll say it again here. I really loved what I saw from him. I think his growth and development has gone really great. If for no other reason than you can see him making a couple of reads here and there, taking off and running. He was their leading rusher in this one. But with so many times when you have mobile quarterbacks, there can be an issue of like, oh, my first read's not there. Okay, I got to go and run with it. Rather than, okay, slow everything down, go to your second, go to your third. What's the concept here? And I didn't see him running unnecessarily here. I really genuinely thought He took the time. You could see him step up in the pocket. Maybe he was pressured a little bit by Riley Hildebrandt and the rest of those guys there, and he found a seam and took off, but it wasn't unnecessarily. And I think that mentality and how he has continued to develop as a quarterback leans into this really nicely as well. Even if you call up a big passing play, he can just take off with it and get those chunk yardage or a first down from that standpoint. And I think that's really going to have to come into play in this one. Now, obviously, that U of T defense, while yes, they did allow an Elijah Barnes to come in there and throw for over 400 yards with only like 6 minutes left and a half, and then the rest of the second half, I attribute that more so to Elijah Barnes being an outstanding athlete than these guys not being great. I mean, that linebacking core, just between Eli Linney and Ryan Stewart on U of T, you know that they're going to step up in some key scenarios to limit the run game as best as they can here. But I'm really interested to see how well is Waterloo going to be able to move the ball on the ground, and how well are they going to be able to hold on to that ball to keep it out of the hands of Scott Burnett and the rest of that outstanding offense.
And yeah, and to add into that linebacking core, a really great day, a bit of a breakout day in that Carleton game for U of T, and Brandon Thibodeau, who ends up with 5.5 tackles and a sack. And when you just look at that in comparison to what he's done in his, I think, 3 or 4 year career, like, on pace to shatter his tackling record that he's gotten so far, in his career with U of T. In terms of this Waterloo attack, obviously, as we said, Nick Orr having the ball in his hands, allowing him to be comfortable, making his reads, running when when it is called for. Obviously, I think that that's going to be the big thing for them, as you highlighted. In terms of the weapons, we obviously saw Anthony Miller out of the backfield, leading them in receptions as a running back. We saw Isaac White, a guy who went from being a quarterback who wasn't even playing to now a receiver, get them 3 receptions. Quentin Springer, again, starting running back, 2 receptions, before you get into guys like Evan Basiliga, who we like, Logan Haru, Tyler Tierney down here, and not even seeing Samuel Slocum on here in terms of guys who netted a reception for them. And I'm just wondering, with this Waterloo offense, that where are you looking ultimately? Like when we're reflecting on the end of the year, or maybe it's coming out of this game. Yes, Nick Orr as the quarterback is gonna, it's his success is gonna define the offense's success in its totality. But who do you think? Like, and I think Quentin Springer to me is the obvious choice based on his versatility, and again, a guy who I think we can just sort of project in saying should play better based on how he performed in week 1 against Ottawa. But who do you think ultimately, when it's all said and done, as a candidate to come out of this year, obviously seeing guys like Justin Sukar leave the program of recent years and whatnot, and some of those other great receivers, who's the guy you think for this Waterloo offense that Nick Orr is going to end up having as that sort of safety blanket that's going to be the more consistent aspect for him? Because coming out of that first week, though I was going and expecting it to be Springer and maybe Samuel Slocum on the receiving end of things, that certainly wasn't validated. I do think those players in particular will end up with good years on the whole. But where are you leaning in terms of Waterloo, in terms of finding success offensively beyond Nick Orr?
To be perfectly honest with you, he's a guy that we saw a little bit last year. Didn't see a whole ton of him in this game, but I have to go with Evan Basiliga. I mean, having that big body and that big frame, he's listed at 6'2", 230, and that's a great frame for him to be in, and just having that great catch radius. We saw him be pretty prominent in the passing game previously. Obviously, his brother, the Basiligas, have done some really great things at Waterloo, and I can expect him to continually be something of an outlet for Nick Orr if he needs to, and just having a big body and a big frame in order to catch those balls and secure them. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Evan in that name, and I think, like you mentioned, Quentin Springer and Anthony Miller, because of their great ability to just be athletes overall, leaking out of the backfield for a quick little out route, or to get people off their game, and suddenly maybe there's a scenario where you're like, hey, that's Quentin Springer in the backfield, but I can see Anthony Miller over at W, and then you rotate guys over, and Anthony Miller comes into the backfield, and now you've got quads into one side with Quentin Springer running a passing route, even if it's just an on the ball kind of route. Now you've got him in space, and a running back in space like the two of them can be very, very dangerous from that setting. So I think playing around with the great backs that you have in this setting, along with getting Evan Basiliga really going here, will allow guys like Logan Haru and Samuel Slocum, once he finally gets into there, to really start to take off, and just to allow this Waterloo offense to continue to build. But I think where we've seen this in the past, and I think the best Waterloo offenses that we have seen, outside of the Trey Ford era, obviously, but has been establishing the run, making sure that these guys aren't just pinning their ears back and coming after their quarterback, and then allowing Nick Orr to be smart with the football and find guys in space.
Now, last thing I want to throw your way, because I think it's fair to say that for U of T, if and is more again for folks that maybe think that they're truly as good as they showed in that first week, is that if they're gonna end up being able to go on this type of a run, they're going to have to establish their run game, because I think eventually, one way or the other, if this is even remotely sustainable to have outings like they did, which, again, you'd be, I think, off your rocker to think that, they're going to break records every single day. But for them to be ultimately a consistently good team, they're going to have to get that run game up and running. And we know that with Lucas Stoikos not being there anymore, Garrett Ellis being someone that we thought could be a promising young running back, it looks like Jack Nyros is the guy for them ultimately. He only gets 6 carries, 14 yards. I have no real issue with that when you're being as productive in the passing game. Why would you hand the ball off when you can just get 50 plus chunk plays down after down? Caleb O'Donohue coming in, picking up 1 rush for 35 yards. We saw his athleticism last year. In terms of this run game, where do you see them ultimately having success? Do you see it being something that they're going to bring into the mix? Obviously, when it was the Clay Sakara show, they were pretty comfortable saying, look, we're going to move the ball in the air, and we have a quarterback in Clay who certainly I haven't really, I know Barnett has some escapability. We saw that's where he got injured last year, was in scrambling and taking on a big hit. But I would certainly assume that, Clay Sakara, you'd still be the one to pick as far as the overall better athlete of the two. But Barnett can do a bit on his legs as well. So we've seen this we've seen U of T under different management, both in head coach and in offensive coordination, in which they were able to say, look, we're going to actually have success being just pass first, and then we'll supplement it as the run. Do you think that's ultimately where they could find success? We're not that far off of years where they went 4-4, and I think it was the COVID year they got to host a home playoff game for the first time in forever. What do you make of the U of T in terms of the running attack? You were listing off those offensive linemen, and obviously, hey, it's nice as an offensive lineman when you can just pass protect and see your receivers go for big touchdowns, but you got to let those guys run wild every once in a while, keep them happy, and start running the ball. What do you make of U of T in terms of their rushing threat? Is it just the Jack Nyro show and whatever Barnett or O'Donohue, if he's in every now and then, can pick up? Is it something they need to whether rely on more or turn to more to set up for possible future success? What do you make of that aspect of their offense?
Well, first and foremost, U of T is, at least in the time that I can remember, has never been a team that's like, we're going to line up, we're going to run the ball directly at you, and we're going to see a lot of success here. I think even just with Coach Kanichis and his style of play, I saw a few times where Jack Nyros is actually lined up as like one of the upbacks, almost outside of the offensive tackle, and then rotates and motions back into the backfield to just try and get some linebackers off their play. I mean, if you have a Mac linebacker who's keyed in on Nyros, and you can see him start to motion around, and kind of gives you a pretty good understanding of what the defense is going to be in. But even talking about the strength of what Scott Barnett was able to do against that Carleton defense and finding his guys and being really smart with it, that leans pretty well into, hey, let's get some run reads into this. Let's get a true zone read here, maybe even capping the backside end. So now you're reading the linebackers instead, and you're checking them to see where are they dropping into coverage, or if somebody's blitzing. Now I've got, like we saw a lot in that Carleton game, I've got Jake Oseen, or I've got Chris Joseph screaming across the middle here just to find them in space and allow them to knife up the field to gain more yardage. So I think that the development of this run game is going to come into allowing Scott Barnett to read everything and to read this defense really well. And if they do just start to pin their ears back, that's where Jack Nyros really does some great work in not only getting the ball and having that speed, but willing to put his head down and gain a few yards by running somebody over here. Now, when you're going to try and put your head down against Michael Omaseni, that's going to be a big hill to kind of cross here. But I think seeing the development of this run game and seeing the development of Scott Barnett in particular will add into that and allow them to really start moving the ball down the field. So you might see, by design, maybe Scott Barnett does end up throwing it 40 times a game as a usual thing, but I think a lot of those plays will be because he read the defense, saw that they were reading run, and then found his guy and went out there.
Nonetheless, I'm really excited to see how this Waterloo offense can keep developing. I'm excited to see what U of T is going to do against the defense that will certainly be more comfortable in their calls and bring up more pressure. Saturday night under the lights at a packed varsity stadium for two teams that are pretty neck and neck going into the season, who were neck and neck in their one game they had last year. I'm going to say that tilts my pick in favor of U of T on this one. I'm going to take U of T, but I don't think it's going to be a similar one. I think you mentioned it with Omaseni there in the middle and K-Mac being able to perhaps dial up some pressures to make that U of T offense uncomfortable at times. I think they'll be challenged, but I'm going to go with them on this day. Tom, who are you liking in this matchup?
I'm right there with you, my friend. I'm going with the Varsity Blues in this one. If for no other reason than like I mentioned previously, I like the direction where this offense is going. I like the development that I'm seeing from Scott Barnett and the rest of what this team looks like. And I don't think that we really saw what this U of T defense was able to do. I think Ryan Stewart had a pretty quiet game against Carleton, and that could be for a specific reason. So seeing him and Eli Lenny and the rest of that U of T Varsity Blues defense start to kick into gear as well, I think that they're due for a big one here. So I'm going with the Varsity Blues.
And I mean, he was on the participation list, but was left without a stat. Owen Casey, also, again, a top defensive player when he's in there. And I'm sorry, I feel like I keep flipping between Owen Casey, Owen Cassie. It's kind of like a Mean Girls thing. Is Caddy here? It's Katie. Anyways, U of T under the lights is best show in town, but the best show of the weekend is the Sunday night affair as Tom howls into the air, where Western, coming off of their 4-0 win, are returning home to London, Ontario to take on my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins,
Guelph Griffins. Everybody's Guelph Griffins.
We just about nailed it there. The Sunday nighter, 7 o'clock kickoff from Western. I mean, it's such a, my soul leaves my body a little bit when there's years where we don't get a Guelph Western matchup. It was so great to have it in the playoffs last year, but when we don't get it as a regular season affair, it just hurts a little bit more. We're going to be in the house for that one, obviously. Guelph coming off of the loss at home against Laurier. Western, as we mentioned, picking up the big win on the road against the arch rival Queens Golden Gales in a 4 overtime affair. Tom, where do we even begin with this one? I think we have to start with the quarterbacks. Because on the one hand, the question of just how healthy Evan's going to be in this one, having seen him dislocate his shoulder, albeit his non-throwing shoulder, in that game against Queens. And, regardless of whether he was injured this, that, and the third, a game that will pull the numbers up really wasn't the type of day you expect from him. And a guy named Tristan Aboud, who kind of similar with Elijah Barnes, major productive game, but a tale of two halves. Elijah in the case that he came in darn near the end of the first half, and Tristan in just the approach he took to utilizing his legs to be able to then perhaps open up the passing game for him more so in the second half. To me, and frankly, though this goes against our top 55 list, putting injury aside, I think Guelph, certainly with the injury question, Guelph's coming into this game with the better quarterbacks in this one, because of course we know Marshall McCray and what he can do, though the triple option moment was an unfortunate one in that game against Laurier versus a banged up Evan Hillock. And even with him not injured, I know we put Evan ahead of Tristan, not by all that much. And just with the early returns of the season, my goodness, when we talk about top quarterbacks in this league, Tristan is right there. But of course, we know that when Evan's right, he is as good as any of these guys. But the injury concerns have been just unfortunately such a major piece of the latter part of his career. Let's start with the quarterbacks. Tom, what do you make of these two guys? Obviously, the injury part, it was so unfortunate with Evan. And with Tristan, just with that huge offensive line, giving him all the time back there, and then utilizing his legs and finding his receivers was a huge day for him. What do you make of this matchup from the quarterback standpoint?
I'm really interested to see it, to be honest with you. I mean, regardless who's starting at quarterback for Western, to see the growth of Tristan Aboud, like we were talking about, and once again, oh my God, it's like we know what we're talking about here. To see him with another great game against a very good Laurier defense, to me, just cements the fact that Aboud is continually getting better and better and better. Now, as it was pointed out to us pretty passionately, maybe some folks who know a thing or two about receiver were not exactly happy with the Guelph receivers. I have to think that that's continually going to get better as well. I still think the world of Willem Arsenault and Tessier and the rest of that class here. So I'm thinking that we'll continue to see those guys get better and better. And with Tristan Aboud, if he's given all the time in the world like he was against Laurier, ooh, this is going to be a rough day for Western fans there. Now, I think that Max von Muhldorfer, Soren Holschmidt, even Jude Buchanan or Luca Ferrancino, whoever wants to come off the edge or start to blitz here, they're going to start to do as much as they can to get pressure as much as they can against him. But like we said previously, that's a very damn good Guelph offensive line. Now, going to the Western quarterbacks quickly here. Yes, like you mentioned, if Evan is out, that's a huge blow to this Western squad. He is a fantastic quarterback for these Western Mustangs. And at bare minimum, even if people want to crap on him, whatever, he's great in the system that Coach Richards puts him in week after week with these Western Mustangs. But the other side of this as well is I don't want people to sleep on Jerome Rancourt because he has the physical capabilities in spades. I mean, we talk about him being like an offensive lineman, but he's built like that. He can run like that. And if you actually watch him throw the ball, he's got phenomenal touch. Even that touchdown pass that he threw in triple overtime to Seth Robertson, while Seth got open, it's a beautiful ball that he throws. And even there was an incompletion that he had to Seth because of Ashton Miller Melanson and some fantastic coverage. But even that was perfectly thrown to where Seth was going to be. So to me, if Jerome Rancourt is the quarterback who's starting in here, it's not. My question there isn't, oh, and can he make these throws because he's got a cannon for an arm, and I've seen it in both practice and in games that he's been in. But it's more so how well is he going to be able to read this Coach Matt Berry defense and see about picking guys apart here, or are they just going to say, hey, Ethan Dolby, you had 147 rushing yards against last year's best run defense. Why don't you try to do it again against Guelph?
Certainly. And, I'm so curious what's going on in those Western practices in this week preparing for it because I do agree. If Jerome is given the reins to say, like, hey, look, you're going to start against Guelph, we're going to give you the first team reps. I think that in some ways, even if Evan might be okay, that might be their best bet on this one if Evan's still slightly banged up. Because frankly, they still end up, I had the number just in front of me, like 451 yards of offense. And of course, that includes 4 OT sessions. So, kind of factor that in as well. But, Evan playing most of this game, and then of course with Jerome coming in late, I still look at Masseri only getting 4 receptions for 95 yards. Seth Robertson with 5 receptions, 82 and 1 touchdown. Dasani McIntosh adding in 2 receptions, 54 yards. We talk about the person that you spoke with from the Guelph side of things being unhappy with their production, and I don't know if someone like if for example we were to ask say someone like Savon Magne Jones like what did you think about these receivers from your alma mater or something like that in terms of their production. I don't know if you have anything to say in terms of like oh they should have done better, but they certainly can do better. Like we've had a lot of our conversation about what we expect as certain baseline production days from these various weapons, and I look especially like a guy at Seth Robertson, and this comes purely out of respect for what he's done and what he can do. And I look at this and I say, yeah, Ethan Dolby, I know rushes for the 147. Jack Kelly has a couple nice rushes as well. But to me, I'm like, Seth, obviously you can't control if the ball's going your way or not. But I almost want him going to that huddle. And maybe more so if it's Jerome, just kind of being able to, it was sort of that more veteran presence of like, I am that dude here now, especially if Evan's out, of being like, get me the dang ball and let me cook. 5 for 82 and a touchdown. Those are nice numbers. But I think for them to really, again, be as explosive as they can be, I think this is a day for Seth where again, if that's their baseline production, 5 receptions, nearly 100 yards, and a touchdown, like you're not mad about that. But as you said, that touchdown came in the overtime period. I want to see Seth step up in this one. I think Maseri can give more to that, and then that allows for guys like Dasani McIntosh, Rayshawn Blake, who you were getting word out of the Western camp. They were really excited to see what he can be able to do. Roman Campanaro being able to get into the mix there as well. So I'm curious to see how they look to attack this. And as we know, the Western offense, it starts with that rushing attack, and I don't think that's going to change. And loved what Dolby was doing, but much like some folks from the Guelph camp are coming out of that game being like, yeah, it's all well and good that Aboud put up those numbers and that, Arsenault and Vardy and Thomas and Tessier, they're getting these receptions, they're picking up yards and everything like that. But that receiving group should be better. I want to put that same thing on this Western receiving group, not out of any type of like disrespect towards them, but frankly, the opposite. With Maseri and Robertson being your top two dudes in there, come on. And if it's Jerome in there and if he's practicing with them all week, I think the expectation, the bar should be higher. And I'd love to ask Seth about that, of like, if that's a fair take from him. Obviously, if you're listening, Seth, I'd love to get your feedback on it. Because again, it comes straight out of being like, you guys are some of the best receivers we should have. And if it is Jerome, and especially if he's getting those reps in practice this week in preparation, I think they should expect better, even though, of course, we love this defense for Coach Barry and the players that he has in the mix with them.
Yeah, and I like the take of having that expectation of this Western passing game to be better. I think a lot of that has to fall on Evan Hillock's shoulders.
Oh,
I mean,
true.
I don't necessarily completely agree. Well, completely agree. I don't think that the stats are 100% because, like I mentioned, even talking about Jerome Rancourt, I know for sure he had 2 passes at least in the overtime, and it only says that he's 1 for 1 here. So once again, we'll see. But
Fair.
Evans' passing stats here, according to this, 13 for 29, 224 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Like, I don't think he had his best game being nice about it, honestly. I mean, there was a number of times where it looked like we mentioned on the review pod, where he had a guy who was doing a curl to the inside, yet the ball was thrown to the outside or something along those lines. So as good as those receivers are, if they're trying to be really great, if they're not on the same page as the quarterback, I don't really know what else you can do from that standpoint.
No, you're totally right. And again, that's why I want to set up being like, as a receiver, there's only so much you can control.
Mhm.
And frankly, like let's call it what it is. Cause like we've said about Evan, at the very least, he doesn't have bad games. That was a bad game from McQueen's. I don't care about the injuries because I know he's not going to use the injuries as an excuse. That was a bad day for him. And part of it being just a bad day overall because he was banged up as well. No, that was not a good day for Evan. And of course, then that's going to have that trickle effect into that receiving core. 100% accept that. I want to flip the script a little bit. We talked about the day that Dolby had, and obviously with Western running the ball, we know that's where they're going to want to, butter their bread, so to speak. We loved what Isaiah Smith was showing at times. Wondering maybe was he at a couple plays, maybe dancing around too much. Though we don't love this Western. Well, sorry, though there's question marks we still have with this Western front seven. When you have a guy like Von Muhldorfer in the middle, Jude Buchanan as someone who is just going to try to take your head off play after play, and Franzisi and Soren Hallschmidt and guys like that who, just like similar years past, obviously aside from when you had, Riley McLeod in there as well, not necessarily a guy in that front seven who is like truly massively dominant. I know I'm forgetting their Sam linebacker's name from a couple years back who just was great. That's my bad, Western folks. I'm interested in that matchup. Behind this huge offensive line, we saw that Aboud ended up being the leading rusher, the 96 yards, the 2 touchdowns, including the one that brought them just on the doorstep of being able to tie it up. I feel like if you're Guelph, obviously, if Aboud can put up those numbers in the passing game that he did again, all the better for them. But I think the ultimate success of this Guelph team is going to be when they're ending up with games where, I mean, you're still obviously wanting to, like, you're not going to turn down nearly 100 yards from your quarterback rushing in the 2 touchdowns. But I think just as an overall mechanism of this team functioning at their best is seeing Isaiah Smith at the top of their rushing totals, right? And obviously when Donovan Malloy comes back and Caleb Sargent, that's going to make it that much more fruitful. Mason Duval had a couple carries on there. Didn't get to see Kanye really get in the game, and that's obviously a lot of my personal bias, just knowing the kid and loving the kid and recognizing what he can do. Let's talk about the Guelph rushing attack against this Western defense. I just am of the belief that, obviously, again, you're not going to turn down what Tristan gave you on the ground in that game. And a lot of it was because he had so much time. And then he's starting to say, well, shoot, there's the room to take off. Our receivers have kind of pushed the defense a little back. They're into their coverage now. I can at least pick up 10 yards. I should be able to pick up 10 yards, no problem with a slide. But I think you want to actually see, the way this team is structured, the pieces they have with that offensive line, Isaiah Smith or one of the other running backs they have in there once they're getting healthier, leading you in terms of your rushing.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you're going to start to see here. I think having this, once again, you talk about how important it is to have real reps and to get people back into the fold with a lot of these spaces here. Having Isaiah Smith back and very clearly the way that he was moving in that last game, having him being healthy and relying on Coach Soria and the rest of that outstanding coaching staff to just kind of take him by the shoulder and say, hey, young man, you outweigh that guy by 20 pounds. You can put your shoulder down and keep running. And just allowing him to physically see, oh, yeah, I had this scenario. I did have an unbelievable hurdle earlier in the game, but I do want to get back to what my bread and butter is, which is running the ball and running the ball hard. I think seeing that and getting him back into form there will continue to have him back into where we saw him a couple of years ago before that injury really happened. So I am expecting him to be at the top of that rushing leaderboard, if for no other reason that I don't think that Western is real. I think that Laurier being back and worrying about those receivers gave up a lot of space for Tristan Abu to try to take off and run with it. I don't think Western's going to, after watching that film, do the same thing. I think they're going to have somebody who's ready to take that on. But once again, if you're dedicating somebody to look at Tristan Abu to make sure that he's not running, at least from a linebacker standpoint, then you're not double covering somebody in the back end, and is that allowed Abu to find that? So it's a very double-edged sword from that standpoint, albeit I do think that the run game for Guelph is going to get back to where we expect it to be, especially with the quality of that offensive line and Isaiah Smith and what we think that he's going to be able to do. I did get word that we're not 100% sure about Donovan Malloy, but we're optimistic that he could be back somewhat soon. Caleb Sargent apparently had a boot on the last time that he was seen, so really trying to rehab that. He's definitely a few weeks away, but if nothing else, just seeing Isaiah Smith, Mason Duval, and then even your guy in Kanye Nethersol, they certainly still have the depth of backs, but not having Malloy or Sargent in there is a big blow.
Now, for Guelph defensively, you know, and we do this sometimes, and I think there's validity in it, though sometimes it feels like a cop out, like it'll sound for me from the Guelph standpoint of you look at what Laurier was able to do offensively, and when you take out that one touchdown for 70 yards for Ethan Jordan, on the whole, you have to be happy with how Guelph was able to contain that passing attack. Obviously, for Laurier, it's a full every stage of the offense attack where they can run the ball really effectively. And it's, if you slow one thing down, something else is going to get you one way or the other. You have to be happy about that. When we think about this Western offense, you obviously need to commit to slowing down the run game first and foremost, but as well thinking about this aspect of, okay, look, you got these guys in Seth, you got these guys in Braden who can really beat you for chunk yardage. What are you looking for from this Guelph defense? Again, I'm ultimately fairly happy with how they performed against what should be the best offense in the OUA. Western's going to be right near there when it's all said and done as far as top offenses. Early returns in the season from what we're seeing with these two clubs. What are you looking for this Guelph team to do defensively to slow down a team where, especially given that the quarterback question mark is in the air, they're going to try to run the ball. But being cognizant as well that if you overcommit there, they have some guy. We know Western loves throwing it off those play action looks, and when you have a guy like Seth who can take the top off, and Masseri who's just big dude will run you over and can run past you. How do you reconcile those two things? Where of all days, you have to imagine Western's really going to want to run the ball. They're at home, it's their house, all that type of sort of Western power G type of attitude type stuff, while keeping an eye on two receivers who, when it's all said and done, are some of the best in all of Canada.
Yeah, I think that the Guelph front seven is going to have one of their best games in order to really, because regardless, even if Evan is back into this, especially with an injured non-throwing shoulder, they're going to lean on the run game a little bit more than they would normally to make sure that he's not taking any unnecessary hits. And even you and I kind of speculated last year that maybe that Waterloo score that Western did was a little bit of trying to get back at K-Mac for leaving. There's somebody on that defensive line who left and went to Guelph. So maybe for no other reason than just say, hey, Andre Thompson, you want to put on the red and black instead of the purple and silver? Fine. Here's power right at your face here. Let's see how well you can block against this or defend against this. So even just knowing that, there's going to be a lot of run heavy going into this, even if I'm just poking fun at it a little bit here. But the rest of that Guelph defensive line is going to have their best game here. As always, you have to do when you have a Western offensive line, especially if Sebastian Siebold, if he is back, that only adds more to this great line. But seeing Keegan O'Neill back out there and seeing Philip Cote in the middle and our guy, obviously, and Eric Anderson, Reed Cluccia over at the right tackle spot, this is a top tier level offensive line. So you're going to need to see your best work out of your guys up front, especially even in Braden McDougal, excuse me, Eunice Larry, Javon Jacobson. Those guys in the back end are going to have to play their best football here to really make sure that Western's not able to run the ball at will. Because even if you have a guy like Jerome Rancourt, who I think is better than what people assume he is as that quarterback spot, if he's allowed, if everybody's just loading up against the run and then he just sees, there's Seth Robertson on a one-on-one. Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. That's going to be a recipe for disaster there. So making sure that the guys who are there currently can stop the run or at least limit it as best as they can to force a second and long is going to be in the best interest of Guelph.
Well, and like, just if folks didn't realize it or forgot, like, this was a guy in Jerome Rancourt that was in the East-West Bowl this year. He has the talent, he has the size. I mean, the idea of him taking off and running is a terrifying prospect as well. So you talk about, teams who might have to add a little bit, spying quarterbacks and things like that. Like that certainly has to be an aspect that Guelph is concerned about going into this game, if it is in fact Rancourt out there. Because again, we're purely speculating from where we sit right now. I mean, as far as the Andre thing is concerned, joking aside, it's like, hey, Western, look, Guelph got him into their school. Y'all, I'm sure, tried to pull whatever strings you wanted to. Didn't come through on the hometown kid. So if anything, I'm flipping the script and I'm going, hey, Andre, hey, this is your hometown, your first, appearance back in front of your guys. Those stands are gonna be filled with some kids that are maybe, a little conflicted of cheering against their home team when, one of their boys is playing for the opposite side. Be interested to see that. I'm so excited knowing that we're in the house. The true Ethan Martin homecoming, seeing him starting in front of his home team, his home crowd. I'm so excited. And of course, Jackson McKay getting just what a celebration of London football. When you think about some of these guys on both sides of the ball, Thomas Silcox, though obviously not his first year into the program, but as well, just the pageantry of it all, the Sunday night. It's such a beautiful thing we have in store here. I guess last thing I want to throw out before we make our picks on this one is, I'm curious if there's a certain aspect of, that Laurier defense is obviously as good as it gets in the OUA and are just dogs across the board in that secondary. All those guys that we love, Cote, Emily Cote, Jahari Hastings, Ethan Bayfield, Agar Heiner, Dollywall. It keeps going and going. And I think about this defensive secondary with Western, and you think about obviously Richard Adu who I have to imagine is coming into this game with his ears pinned back being like, you know what? I owe my boys a little bit here. Like, we came out with the win that week, but I probably owe my boys a little bit. Ethan Martin, Chris Cameron Cogler being another really good name, Jackson McKay, and obviously Thomas Silcox, as you mentioned, like such a star-studded defensive secondary, some youth in there that has a lot of talent. And thinking about that Guelph receiving core, and saying that they had a good game, but they should be able to play better. On the one hand, it could be a scary proposition, so to speak, of saying, man, if we didn't like how they played against that secondary against Laurier or thought they could have maybe given a little more at times, golly, they better step up in this one because Western isn't going to let you just, kind of lollygag, for lack of a better word at times. I'm hoping that that receiving core looks at that as a challenge to be able to say, well, hey, you know what? If we're not bringing it, these guys will take our heads off. So
Mhm.
I think from that standpoint, there's almost an aspect that, and Ashton Mustache Cumberbatch also being a guy we saw for that defense who's just like, I mean, number one, I don't know if there's any relation, but you see Cumberbatch for a defensive back, you have to be happy about that. You add in the name Mustache, and hey, look, shout out to you, 30. But there's part of me, again, from the Guelph Homer side of things that I'm like, hey, for those receivers to be able to say, look, step up to this challenge because we talked about it for Guelph, starting with Laurier at home and then on the road against Western is tough. And you know that Western is really going to try to attack that box and try to slow down the run and put pressure on Aboud. We saw it last year in that semifinal matchup, even though we're clamoring and saying, we don't know if Western has the guys to be able to get to Aboud. Well, they managed to do it. We know that they have some of the best coaches in the OUA dialing up that defense. I'm really excited. Frankly, I do think this is going to be a physical matchup. First and foremost, I think both teams are going to want to run the ball and be, try to establish who is the most dominant in the trenches. But so if that's somewhat of a wash one way or the other, because these offensive lines are both incredible, I think I give Guelph the nod in terms of their box play. But then I look to say for these Guelph receivers, much like the same way with Western, being able to say that's going to be where the X factor is which one of these units, Western's receiving core or Guelph's receiving core, is going to manage to have those big plays in those moments where all of a sudden, yeah, as you said about Jerome looking at Seth maybe on a one-on-one, where similarly Aboud's maybe saying, oh man, those halves are creeping in, and I know I got Willem going over the top, and Jackson's having to support over here. Let's take that shot. I think that plays both ways with these two clubs in terms of wanting to again be the more physical team up front, and then which receiving core is going to step up big for them. Guelph obviously had a much more productive day out of their quarterback than Western did last week, but still with room to grow out of that receiving core. To me, that's the matchup I think will be the difference maker in this game. Which of those units comes up big? Tom, final thoughts to you, whether about that or anything about this matchup before we make our picks.
Yeah, it's really going to be interesting. I wasn't really sure what to think of this Western defensive line, to be perfectly honest with you, going into this. And then you start talking about how good we think that Queens O-line is, especially those tackles, and both Holschmidt and Franzese has sacks on the day. They finished with 4 sacks against a Queens team that has a really good offensive line. So I'm expecting those guys to get some more pressure on Tristan Aboud as well. And even if they don't sack him, just pressuring him to get rid of the ball or to take off and run with it, something I think they're going to have an impact into this. Max von Muhldorfer obviously owning that one tech spot, doing the forklift like we've seen him do before. So I'm interested to see from that standpoint. I love the fact that you brought up Western's defensive secondary as well, because like you mentioned, I'm also with you that I think Richard Adubafor is walking out here being like, it seems like I got to remind everybody that I'm the best DB in the country here. So let me just hunker down, get back to work, and let everybody else know. I liked a lot what I saw from Thomas Silcox and what I saw from Jackson McKay in their first outing as starters in their respective spots for this defense. I think they're going to continue to get better and better here. And man, you start talking, look, what an incredible matchup. This is the hell month, let's say, for the Guelph Griffins, seeing the two very best, at least according to us, at the top of the tier list back to back here. But man, this is some phenomenal football for OUA fans to be watching.
Absolutely. And for Guelph, again, here's your opportunity to prove it that you belong, not just that you can run with the big dogs, but you can get out in front and lead the pack. Tom, who are you taking in this incredible week 2 matchup, Guelph visiting the Western Mustangs?
This is easily the most difficult game to kind of call in this one and to try to pick. There's a lot of varying factors out there, even with, how well are those Guelph receivers going to come back and start to play in here? Is Guelph going to be able to stop the run game? Who's going to be starting at quarterback for the Western Mustangs? With all of those things, I'm going with the ponies in this one. I think the home opener here, the night game, the end cap on the Sunday night is going to have a lot of people being out for it. I believe students should be in the town for this, so there should be a rocking affair as well. And I think just Western and in that proven tier, I think they've got this one. I'm taking the ponies at home.
Call me a homer, brother. Call me whatever you want. You better call me a Guelph Griffin. And I'm taking them to go into Western and pick up the W and to show that they are ready to prove it, that they are gonna, that they are in a position to compete with those top players, those top teams. But one way or another, we know we're in store for an incredible week of OUA football. Tom, fantastic job as always. We didn't talk about this beforehand, but I think you're able to pivot on this enough just before we sign off with folks, just to take you around your U Sports schedule for the week. Tonight being at time of recording on August 28th, we have our first matchup of the week, our opening game out of Can West, Manitoba taking on UBC, 6:30 p.m. kickoff. On tomorrow on August 29th, we have a couple games both coming out of the RSEQ and out of Can West. Montreal visiting Sherbrooke at 7 p.m. and Regina visiting Calgary at 5:30 p.m. As well as Saskatchewan at Alberta on Saturday. Along with the OUA games, you have St. FX at Acadia and St. Mary's taking on Mount Allison. On 7 p.m., along with those two nightcaps we have in the OUA, you have a terrific quarterback matchup where Éloi Latendresse is going to take his McGill Redbirds into Quebec City to take on the Laval Rouge et Or in what, again, as far as quarterbacks are, guys who are going to duke it out for RSCQ MVP supremacy there. And as well, we have, that is our U Sports calendar for the week, in addition to the OUA schedule. Tom, just looking at those matchups, we're obviously seeing the opening of the Can West schedule, though I don't think McGill Laval will necessarily be the game of games that we hope when it's all said and done. I have to imagine that just from the quarterback battle we're getting there, that's probably where outside the OUA action, I know I'm going to keep my eyes on. But what's catching your attention on the U Sports schedule for week 2 or week 1 for the Can West teams?
To be perfectly honest with you, and obviously as a time of recording, it'll be happening today. That Manitoba UBC game, for me, is the one that I'm going to most be looking at. This is the return of Jackson Tatinsky, Braden Stubbs, and the rest of that Manitoba offense that didn't even make it into the Hardy Cup after finishing at the top of the Can West last year. I'm expecting them to come into a UBC and really give them a great game. Obviously, seeing Coach Nil back at the helm for the Thunderbirds here. Who else is really going to step up for these UBC Thunderbirds, especially with so many guys gone, their offensive coordinator? I think there's going to be a new quarterback in there. There's going to be a new running back in there. So this is really where a lot of question marks have to be answered. And if UBC wants to get back into those Hardy Cups like they were a couple years ago, it's going to have to eventually come through Manitoba, in my opinion here. So that game is the one that I'm most looking forward to.
I love the take there. Desjardins, Latendresse, Regime Bold. I mean, golly, it's the future, it's the present, it's RSCQ football at its finest. So that's where I'm keeping my eyes open on. As always, let us know where you are going to be watching your games from this weekend, OUA or otherwise. If you're in the house for either the Queens at Mac, the Windsor at Laurier, the Waterloo at Toronto, or the Guelph at Western game. Took me a moment just to remember all the games we're going to be in the house for. Of course, come hit us up. Come say what's up. If you want to talk your smack, go ahead. But as always, we love seeing you in the flesh and just getting to chop it up, talking OUA and U Sports football. So that'll be a wrap. Can't wait, Tom, for what is surely going to be an outstanding week 2 of OUA football. So happy the full U Sports schedule with Can West opening up is here, and can't wait to be talking with you about all things OUA and U Sports football later on this week, right here at the 55.